Hello everyone and welcome to Techstrong TV. Today is Thursday, June 8th, and I hope you are all having a wonderful day so far. I'm your host, William Willis. In today's show, we have a great broadcast lined up for you with some amazing interviews and specialty shows talking about all things DevOps, security, AI, and more. So without further ado, let's get the show started. Enjoy.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Techstrong TV. My guest for this segment on Techstrong TV is Mr. Sudarshan Kannan. Sudarshan is with Uptick, and if I mispronounce your name, Sudarshan, I apologize. Why don't you say it correctly for everyone?
No worries. I'm Sudarshan Kannan. I'm part of the product team here at Uptick.
Excellent. So, Sudarshan, before we jump into Uptick and what we want to talk about today, why don't we maybe just take a moment to you're part of the product team, but what's your background?
Sure. I come from the breeds of strong security industry, different companies. I've been in security for the last 18 years now. I started off in IAM space and moved to endpoint security, MDMs, and now I'm working in Uptick on the cloud security side.
Excellent. Cloud security has been something that, of course, has been, I remember when I was at RSA conference back in 2005 or so, 2006. The whole cloud and cloud security thing kind of burst on the scene. And we've come a long way since then, right? And there wasn't a cloud native kind of movement back then, but cloud native has certainly helped us with cloud security as well. But here we are, 2023, halfway through 2023, right? It's June now. And, cloud security is still not a settled thing in a lot of places. I think a lot of people would find that hard to believe. But for all of the great progress we've made, there's still so much more that needs to be done. But Sudarshan, let's talk a little bit about Uptick, right? It's a company that we've featured a few times here on Techstrong TV, but not everyone in the audience is going to be familiar. Why don't you give us sort of the Uptick background?
Yeah, absolutely. Uptick, our co-founders started back in 2016, right? They strongly believe that the power of telemetry is very important and the power of data is very important in terms of solving the security problems. They always believe that security is actually a big data problem. So they took the learnings of, our founders come from Akamai, they have some influence from Google, influence from Salesforce. So they took all the learnings from those big companies and then tried to build a capability for the industry, security industry, where we look at the security telemetry at scale and try to solve security problems across all attack surfaces, starting with endpoints and all the way to the cloud. Our founders did not want to stop just at the endpoints. They believe that the attack actually progresses from endpoints and all the way goes to any surface, whether it's cloud, whether it's Kubernetes, control plane, or whatever that is. So that's how the company has evolved the last 7 years. And lo and behold, here we are talking about how we are trying to protect the entire spectrum, starting from the laptops to the cloud.
Absolutely. And before we jump in, one other thing. For people who want to get more information on Uptick, I know it's spelled a little non-conventional, right? Let's just make sure we get it out there for them. It's UPTYCS. UPTYCS. Is that upticks.com, upticks.io? What's the website?
Upticks.com.
Excellent. So UPTYCS. All right. Now that we've got all that out of the way, let's talk about what we want to talk about today, and that is the industry's first cloud security early warning system.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Sudarshan, what are we talking about here?
Yeah. So if you think about the recent breaches, let's start with the industry problem, right? Forget about what Uptycs has to offer, but let's start with the industry problem, right? The industry, if you look at the last 6 months to a year, all the major breaches have always started with endpoints, a developer laptop. For example, if you look at the Circle CI incident, if you look at the LastPass breach that happened twice within a span of 6 to 7 months, right? All of that started with the laptop. Why? Because humans are the weakest factor in the security space, or the weakest link in the security space. Behind every laptop is a human behind it. So if I'm using my laptop or you're using your laptop, right? We are always using that endpoint computing devices. That is where the attackers know that is the weakest link, and then they go after that laptop. From there, they don't stop at the laptop, right? At the end of the day, they're after your IP, they're after your data, they're after your compute instances to do ransomware or coin mining or whatever that may be, right? They're after the critical assets or the crown jewels of a company. Once they start from a laptop, they try to move into different environments, whether it's cloud, whether it's your orchestration platform like Kubernetes. They try to move across and try to eventually get to the data. So what we recognize is detecting an attack in one place, the other is not enough, right? You can think of all the industries acting in silos today. You have a laptop, you have a specific EDR component that's looking at laptop alone, all right? Then you have the cloud security piece that's looking at cloud alone. Then you have the Kubernetes or containers that are looking at that layer alone, right? These are all individual silos. When it comes to security operations, bringing all this together is very challenging from a security ops person, right? They have to look at multiple screens, disjointed data experiences, disjointed UI experiences. Now their effectiveness goes down significantly, or mean time to detect or mean time to respond goes down significantly. So what our founders believed is, let's try to solve this holistically across all attack surfaces. So you have to detect across all different attack surfaces and bring that all together and correlate that in a single data model, single UI. That is where this whole early warning system that we talked about earlier, that's what it's all about.
Absolutely. Now, look, this all sounds wonderful, but productizing that, and I haven't always sat here doing interviews. I founded a few venture-backed companies. Taking this concept and turning it into more than a UI, but a real product that sits behind the UI and powers the UI, is the devil's in the details. Let's talk a little bit about how Uptycs is doing that.
Yeah. So basically, we normalize the telemetry at the source itself. When I say source, it's your laptop or your servers. If your workload is running on your cloud environment, if your workload is running on-prem, or if it's a laptop, it doesn't matter. We normalize the telemetry at the source. We beam the telemetry back to our cloud. And we do the same for endpoints. We do the same for cloud. We do the same for the Kubernetes and containers. Once you bring that data back in, we put that in a single data store. Eventually, when you put that in a single data store, it's much easier to correlate across all this using a GraphDB or using a SQL, whatever that may be. We are helping our customers make it simple to query that and build your own dashboards if need be, or provide out-of-the-box visibility in terms of the detections itself across all these attack surfaces.
Excellent. We live in a world, especially when we talk about, let's say, cloud native, right, where open source projects really form the backbone of so much when we look at, like, let's say, observability and stuff like this. I'm wondering if, when we look at sources, they're not just destinations like a laptop or a cloud server or instance, but are you also able to gather data sources from some of the big kind of open source projects out there.
Yeah. So when you say open source project, I'm assuming are you talking about vulnerabilities specifically on the open source, or are you talking about the tools using open source?
Vulnerabilities as well as telemetry.
Yeah.
Whether it's open telemetry or something like that.
Correct. So we recently integrated what we call Amazon Security Lake, where this OCSS, right? OCSS standard, we strongly believe in that open ecosystem, right? That is something that our founders, especially our CEO, Ganesh Pai, is very, very particular about, where we try to integrate with those kind of open framework. Like OCF is a very big open source where you can collect telemetry from different places. That we recently announced it, actually, which is to spot on to your point. We strongly believe in that ecosystem, and then we want to play with that ecosystem really well for the benefit of our customers, by the way.
Sure. And that, I mean, quite frankly, I referenced 2005 RSA cloud security stuff. We didn't have that back then, right? We didn't have this Amazon Security Lake where you had, all of these data points that you can draw upon to help be more effective.
Yeah.
So Darson, let's talk now about how, so now we understand how it works from a product, let's say, point of view. But how is the offering? How do people engage here? Is there a free trial? Is it a proof of concept? How do you engage?
We can do, we allow our target market to pick and choose anything that they want to. There is a trial that they can take a ride and play around to see how it looks like. They can always engage with our sales team to go through a POV, point of proof of concept or proof of validation. We do have different venues when it comes to the go-to-market and reaching out to our customer base, right? There is always the flexibility to try out the new capability and touch and feel what we have to offer. And of course, we have our own store in the Amazon Marketplace, AWS Marketplace as well. So there are different venues that customers can engage with us and start that journey on that whole early warning system that we have built out.
Excellent. And so what does that on-ramp look like, though? So people just go to uptix.com. Where did they go from there? Give us some breadcrumbs if you can.
Yeah, they can go to uptix.com. They can try and sign up for the free trial offer. And from there, we can help guide them through the process and touch and feel. In fact, we are offering a capability where when I say touch and feel, it's just we provide a tenant for our prospects and they can go around and play with the tenant itself and look at how the data is all set up. So how the vulnerabilities work, how these detections work, and how the telemetry is collected across all attack surfaces, they can get that visibility right away once they sign up for the trial. Of course, there is some vetting process internally, but definitely customers and prospects can take advantage of that capability.
Love it. How long is what's been the feedback from customers in the market on this?
Yeah, it's a terrific feedback for us. In fact, a couple of customers have already started engaging with us, and they're very keen to know about how we do this correlation across all attack surfaces, starting from a laptop all the way to our source repository like a GitHub, and if you have any IDP like an Okta, and all the way to the cloud. They're very intrigued by, because that's a real attack that is happening. Those kind of attacks is what is happening in the environment. And now we are able to detect it across these different attack surfaces. They're very, one of the biggest streaming companies, for example, they are very interested in learning about this as well. As we start learning more from our prospects and customers, I'm sure there's going to be a lot more value that we can deliver to our customers, and we can build the product as well beyond what we have delivered today.
Excellent. You know what? I think we did a good job covering this. I'm going to let you have the last word, though. So if I had to ask you, talk to your potential customers out there today, why is this a must-have thing versus a nice-to-have?
Yeah, I know one thing that we all should remember is attackers don't think in silos. Okay, why should we? as defenders, right? So that is the one thing that I want to encourage every organization to think through. Don't think in silos. Think about how you can connect all the dots together and make it operationally feasible for you to execute on those specific detections or vulnerability management, right? That's the most important question that you have to ask as an organization. And we are here to help address those challenges that our target market is having today around this specific problem set.
Understood. Sudarshan, I want to thank you for coming on Techstrong TV today. You've been great. For people, as we mentioned a few times, you want to get more information, go check out Uptycs at uptycs.com. That's the industry's first cloud security early warning system. We're going to take a break here on Techstrong TV. We'll be right back.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you. Hey everyone, welcome to the Open Mainframe Project video series. The Open Mainframe Project video series is a once a month deep dive into what's going on with the Linux Foundation Open Mainframe Project. And we explore various topics of interest to our audience, which are a lot of folks in the DevOps, cybersecurity, cloud native, digital transformation realm, as well as those many people who, have spent their careers working in the mainframe space and continue to do so. Usually, our show has a panel of 3 or 4 experts, and we delve into topics like what's going on with COBOL. What are some of the ways people are using mainframes in hybrid environments and modernization? What are some of the new modern languages and what you could do with them on mainframe, the cybersecurity of mainframes. But today's show's a little different. I'm joined by my co-host of our monthly show, and he's John Murdoch. John is the executive director of the Open Mainframe Project from Linux Foundation. And today we're going to turn the spotlight on John. So a little turnabout's fair play.
Yeah.
But the reason we are, though, is John recently had his book released, and it's available now on Amazon or wherever you get your books from in many different formats. John's holding it up here. Bring it a little closer to John. It's called Open Source Projects Beyond Code. And we're going to dive into this here. John, first of all, thanks for letting us put the spotlight on you this month. I know it's not what we usually do.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping we can kind of let people know what the book's all about.
Absolutely. Thank you for this. And, excited to kind of talk about it, of a project that I've been working on in the background for close to a year now. But I think the real work on this has been going on for, a couple decades now of just building up all the knowledge and insight and, fortunate and just sort of blessing of being able to work with all of these amazing communities and just sort of learn about some of the dynamics.
Absolutely. John, before we dive into the book, I just usually introduce you as the ED for Open Mainframe Project, and then we move on to introduce our panel members or to discuss the topic. But as long as we got you here today, let's dive into a little bit of the John story. Right, you mentioned decades working that kind of contributed to your knowledge in the book. Share your story a little bit with our audience, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So, I've always been someone who's just interested in computers. My dad brought home a TI-99 4A that I thought one of the funnest things to do was to get they used to have basic programs in the old Byte magazines that you could type in and you could, make games and things like that. Although all of them were written for Apple IIs, they weren't written or Commodores. So I'd have to transition the BASIC to, meet the specific dialect. But, from there, I was a computer science grad from Kent State University, just local to me here in Kent, Ohio. And, when I was in university, I started beginning to explore open source. And open source at that time was really new as a term. Open source as a term came in 1998. I started college in 1998. And so I was really at the very early stages. Linux had just been a thing for a couple of years. And, I always found a lot of fascination by the model and, the code availability, and just so much at that time where I was just really learning a ton. And one of the first projects I got involved with was the PHP project. PHP really was one of those very transformational in the web dev realm. And, for your listeners and viewers who have been around web dev for a lot of years, you'll recognize it as sort of the one that transitioned us all from Perl CGI scripts over to really, truly almost what we see today as web dev programming. But it was more to me than just using it, but it was getting involved into these various communities. And one of the first real open source projects I got involved with was PHP, where there was a need to have someone maintain the installer for PHP on Windows. And I jumped in and I did it. It sounded like an area where I had interest in. At the time I was using Windows, so having, environment set up was really, really helpful. And, from there, I started helping maintain that installer, to the point, actually, Microsoft had reached out to me at one point and said, hey, John, we could use some help in a couple areas. Could you fix some things in here for us? And, I'm like, sure, I have no problem with that whatsoever. And I did it. And they were, really felt thankful for it. They sent me a Zune in the mail. For those of you in your...
I remember those.
If you remember the Zunes, I think I still have it. It's in a box somewhere. I used it for a while. But it's one of those.
You could probably download some MP3s too.
Oh yeah. No, they're still cool. Hey, you know what? Am I no stranger to retro technology? Let me.
I see. Right, we look behind you there. Yes.
But that's like it. But those are all building blocks of my career. That built from my first job working in the finance a local lean and bond company, to working at Sugar CRM as a developer, and using sort of the work I did in that community that helped propel me to that. When I was at Sugar CRM is when I transitioned sort of out of software development and into really open source project leadership. I was a community manager there for a number of years, and was able to participate in various different projects, the Open Social Foundation and a number of others. And from there, my work in open source helped transition me to my next career at Bitnami, where I spent time helping build up an ISV program, but also working with a ton of open source communities. And in the background from there, it was a leap to the Linux Foundation. And again, it was really this building upon working with these various communities, both internal, external, meeting tons of people in open source. Early in my career, went to my first open source conference, which I felt like I was, almost a little bit starstruck in a little ways, which is kind of funny, sitting back now. But, a kid from Ohio here, meeting the Rasmus Leerdorfs and those folks that are really the moving and shaking of not just open source, but technology as a whole. And, having those interactions with them was really fascinating. But it's also just, for me, was just sort of finding my way within all of those communities and finding out like who these people are, what's interesting to them, what motivates them, what are the back and forth that they have to consider as they grow and move these projects along, and also within their own careers. I mean, there's people I worked with in open source a couple decades ago that still in open source, some not in it at all, and some in different career paths and whatnot. So, and it sort of led me where I am today. A meeting with Jim Zemlin, and a year and a half later, I was able to join the Linux Foundation, and I've been with them since 2015, and it's been an exciting ride, and really seeing communities from not just a technology level and a technologist, but also understanding it sort of from the business and the other drivers as well, which has just really taught me a lot. And that's the journey to where I am today.
Very cool. And what a journey it's been, though. But John, in many ways, your journey also, I don't want to say parallels, but follows the journey that open source has gone through, right? In 1998, so I was using you don't want to call it open source, let's call it openly licensed software, free software. Back in, pre-internet days, well, pre-commercial internet, BBS days, and
Yep.
that kind of thing. And, then I started what became a hosting company in 1995, 96.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Apache was out, or maybe no. So
it was probably in the early days. It either that it was NCSA Mosaic, one of the two, or somewhere.
Right. Well, that was it. You could use NCSA as a web server. You had the Mosaic or Netscape.
Right.
Came out with a web server, and then Microsoft came out with Internet Information Server, and then, but quickly Apache.
Yeah.
Wow. Just took over, and at the time also, this was a world of OS2 and Unix. If you didn't like Windows, those or Mac were your choices, and then Linux came on the scene, and my God, right? What a revelation. But I still call that era, the Dr. Stallman era of the Cathedral and the Bazaar. Very famous book about open source. And then we sort of graduated to what I call the Big Brother era of open source, where almost every successful open source project, it seemed, had a corporate sponsor that kind of ran it some did it better than others, let's say that. But every corporate sponsor did it for their own somewhat selfish reasons, right? And as long as the community's interest dovetailed with the corporate sponsor's interest, all was, good in the world. But when the corporate overlord had a different agenda than maybe the community wanted, it went
so good. Yeah.
It went, and that's how you started getting all these forks and stuff. So for instance, in the DevOps world, right, we saw Jenkins split off from, I think it was Hudson, right? If you remember.
Yep. Hudson,
Kosake did that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, the Linux Foundation, the Apache Foundation, Eclipse. We saw the rise of today what I call the foundational era of open source.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm an Asimov fan, so I dig that whole foundation thing anyway. But, and it's really allowed companies that used to compete with each other to collaborate. And everybody works for a common good, which I think is probably one of the main reasons behind the phenomenal, not just success, but dominance of open source software today. Mm-hmm. So, and it sounds like you've rode this wave.
I've seen a lot. I've not seen it all yet, but I've darn near seen a lot. And, it's really interesting of how you sort of phrase that, because even if you backtrack back into the 50s and 60s when you saw, systems operators that were collaborating on using some of the sort of the early IBM hardware, and a lot of chapter 1 actually sort of goes through this sort of lineage of open source and sort of less of kind of a, detailed history, but understanding the milestones along there. And, where we had the IBM litigation, the IBM antitrust case in the late 60s and into the 70s, actually didn't get resolved into the early 80s, and, Apple versus Franklin Computer. All of these pieces here started to formulate of how this collaboration model between software creators, software users, and then across organizations really began to form. Back in the 60s and 70s, the hardware was the value point, the software they just gave you, and they gave you all the source code. And, that slowly changed, over time with some of the antitrust cases that happened in the 60s and 70s. But you look at folks, like Richard Stallman, you look at all of these folks that you've mentioned that have been really along the way, that have taken that in their time and place, saw the interesting opportunity because of a market need and a personal interest to do something innovative. For for everything that, one might, say about Richard Stallman, he saw an innovative opportunity to build together a number of common toolings that still underpin so much of technology that we have today. The work around the cathedral and the bazaar was just a really fascinating look at the differences sort of between the hacker communities and how software had been traditionally built at that point. And even when the Netscape source code was, released to the world in 97, 98, people really weren't sure quite what to make of it. It's like, okay, the source code's out here, now what? And frankly, it took Netscape probably about 10 years to figure out what to do with it.
Sure.
And that's really how long it took the Mozilla project to sort of, come into its own and that to become sort of a dominant browser technology that we see today. So it is really, really interesting of how we've got here. And I think, Alan, you see tons of technology trends, and the trends we always see is something new comes out and you see a pendulum swing hard at it. Everyone's all about it. It's the solution to everything. And then the cracks start to happen in the armor, and then the swing comes all the way back. And eventually, as pendulums do, it lands somewhere in the middle, and they figure out where we're at. And I feel like we're getting to that area in open source in general. The concept even behind free software and these hacker communities that really came to be the basis of it was this hard shift against, the heavy commercialization and those sort of structures of software. And came from it was really interesting collaboration models and really interesting innovation models. But then as the cracks in the armor started to happen, within there, especially as it related to businesses being able to adopt some of these technologies and whatnot, we saw the pendulum start to swing back the other way, which is where we saw some of the models that you referred to as kind of like open core. One of the companies I worked for, Sugar CRM, was one of the major open core, software vendors.
Absolutely. And we were customers.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And so that shift started to happen. And then there was a lot of great things to that model, but then the cracks of those armor started to see in as these companies would change licensing models for their code. And so then the next shift, and it was hard to really get true collaboration happening. And so then you saw, the pendulum is starting to land somewhere in the foundation area. And again, I think there's even some breadth in there of where we will fully land. I think a lot of important technologies are landing in there, but there's technologies that are outside of that are able to sort of live in these user communities, fairly well. And you see people, having little businesses around them. One interesting one is the computers behind me, which you see on all these, various podcasts and video casts we do. The technology that is used for the SCSI hard drives within those, because you can't buy a SCSI hard drive anymore, is this project called Pi SCSI, which is basically a custom header that sits on top of a Raspberry Pi that emulates a SCSI device. So you can, basically have a hard drive in these things. And that there has a huge hacker community of enthusiasts and retro computing enthusiasts, because it's not just Macs. I mean, Amigas and, all sorts of other computers that use the similar drives at the time you use them. But what becomes really interesting is from there, you saw, you see a bunch of Tindy shops open. You see a bunch of, different sort of entrepreneurial things of people building up this hardware to sell it, right? Not exactly a foundational model, that we would be accustomed to in like an open mainframe project or an LF Energy Foundation or anything, or, Apache software. But you see sort of, again, this sort of community that's found its own ethos of how these things work together. So it's really, really fascinating how we've got here. And it's so much of just riding a lot of the current and seeing what's worked, what doesn't, and knowing the fact that each community is unique of how it works. And I think that's the most fascinating of all of this.
Absolutely. John, you're right. We get pitched all day. We see a lot of stuff come by our desk here. One of the things I get, though, is a lot of people who, they all have one or two great blogs in there. They have a great idea for an article, and they really feel passionate about it. Because without passion, it's very hard to write. It's very hard to do anything if you're not passionate about it, quite frankly. And you know, everyone has one great novel in them, they say, or almost everyone. A lot of people never really write it, though. They never really realize their dream about that. What drove you to write this book?
You know, I think there was two pieces to it to me. One is a lot of the topics I address in the book were things I talk with people all the time. So there was a pragmatic side of me of like, you know, geez, I should just write all this down to have it in there. You know, maybe as a slight joke of, you know, hey, if a project wants to ask me a question, read the book first and then come back to me. No, I'm just joking. I would never make people do that. But I think the second part of it is I really find a lot of fascination on these various systems of how people and groups come together. And, you know, there's a lot of books in open source that go into licensing and, you know, in various aspects. You know, John O'Bacon, The Art of Community is a fantastic book that goes into community building. But the one thing that I think we've not seen a lot of great real writing, at least from what I saw, is trying to look at the amorphous and interestingness of these open source projects. Because, you know, I even run to it with my own family of trying to explain to them how these things work. And sometimes they look at me like I'm a little bit crazy. But I saw this sort of passion in this idea of, you know, I just kind of want to explore this. Like I want to see kind of what these different projects do and sort of understand the dynamics that happen in there. So there was as much of a pragmatic of I want to write down everything in my brain, but at the same time, I just kind of want to explore sort of these areas a little bit and, you know, these ideas and thoughts and premises. And, you know, in areas in the book, I go find projects that have done a lot of this, some good, some bad. I've tried to leave the bad names of the projects out there because that's just not fair to them. But really understanding the uniquenesses that all of these are a part of, because I mean, I joked about it earlier, but it's dead serious. Like none of these two projects are the same. Yeah. And you don't, I've never seen everything. I've seen a lot, but I've not seen everything. But you see so much interesting patterns across the board here. And that sort of drove me to do this. So, you know, it's somebody else that, you know, might be a technical person that really understands their craft, they really understand their technology, the amorphousness of how these projects work and, you know, the nuance, it's hard. You know, one of the first things somebody told me when I got into community management was, John, you know, and I was, like I said, was a software engineer, hacking code's easy, hacking these people are hard. And being able to sort of not necessarily, I mean, this book is not like a full, like, do all of these things, like, you know, what have you, but I look at it as sort of a bit of like a cookbook where there's these topics explored, there's, you know, these cases and things within these topics that are explored, but it leaves you sort of as the reader with maybe not knowing the answers, but at least knowing all the right questions to think about and being able to build from there. So yeah.
Love it. You know what? Being you brought it up, let's explore sort of the topography of the book, if you will, by at least just going through some chapters. So it starts off in my mind, like really the first 3 chapters are foundational, right? The whats and whys of open source licensees and IP management, which I have to tell you is still a very misunderstood topic.
Oh yeah.
Of how a company, you know, let's say donates a project to the Linux Foundation. What does owning that IP mean, right? And so forth, versus just managing a project or being involved in a project.
Oh yeah. And I always categorize that as I am not a lawyer and do not provide any legal advice in that.
Right. Well, I mean, but you know what? Look, as someone who's been in the open source world a long time, this is an area that's undergone. I mean, this is what this used to get religious.
Oh yeah.
Right. The finer points of the lower GPL versus the regular GPL versus the MIT license, and God forbid. We wanted to open source a project we were working on at a previous company I co-founded. in like 2004 or 5. But we didn't like the existing OSI models for licensing. And so we kind of wrote our own.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of a live and let live.
Yeah.
But, we own the IP. And man, did we get our heads handed to us because, there were only 6 licenses, or maybe it was 7 licenses that were approved at the time.
Yeah.
And if you weren't using one of those, the claim was you couldn't call what you were doing open source. Make up another name for it.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's not under one of those licenses, it's not open source. And, to me, that was a little too orthodox. I was more of a reform guy, to tell you the truth. But I think we're not quite as rigid as that anymore when it comes to it.
I think we're trying to align on less, because license proliferation is an issue. There's no doubt about that. But I think the one thing that I often have seen in communities is, you're right, people take licensing from sort of a religious standpoint. And I think it's getting better, but as opposed to looking at it from sort of a pragmatic standpoint of what is the problem you're trying to solve, who is your community? Because right. I mean, I'll be honest, like there's some projects that a GPL v3 makes absolutely perfect sense for. There's some that a MIT license makes perfect sense for. There's some that it's all over the place. And it's the same thing. Anybody asks me, is like, what license do you recommend? I first start off by answering, well, I am not a lawyer and I cannot provide legal advice. You should talk to your own counsel. But the second thing that I will say is that each project's different. Each community is different. Like we see a lot of folks gravitate towards these, but there's a lot of circumstances that make you pick that. And that's like where the nuance that comes into open source comes from. And it gravitates even through the governance half of it. So I'm with you. It's complicated, but it's kind of like complicated on purpose because you sort of have to wrestle with who the people are that are using your code and what you hope they do with it and what you hope they do upstream with you.
Yep, no doubt.
Yeah.
So then the next chapters again deal with kind of, hey, if you're an organization using open source, right? And today, just about every single, 98 out of 100 are using open source. Probably even more than that now. How do you align around it? How do you understand that you're in license compliance and governance and hosting? But then from that point, John, the book kind of takes a little bit of a slightly bend to the left, right? And it's about, all right, hey, if you're starting your own open source project, or you're a maintainer, or you're someone in the community helping to run a project, how do you run a successful project beyond the users, if you will? What's involved in running an open source project? And that is something that I think a lot of people may not realize everything that goes into it. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, no, it's hard. It's something that frankly, every single open source project out there sort of struggles with all of that to some degree. And for various reasons, but it's also something that just doesn't work itself out by happenstance. You have to intentionally think about it and you have to intentionally work on it. And I think that's one thing why I spent so much time in there, because you kind of need to have so much of that mindset of, what it's like, not just being a maintainer, but what it's also like being a contributor, because I mean, you see sometimes in open source projects, like, well, geez, I don't know why people aren't coming using this, or I have all these people using this code, but nobody's contributing everything upstream. And so you kind of have this view of these like users are your enemy. And it's
so I've seen that.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Where maintainers, I think, are just, they all of a sudden those users are just a PIA.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're parasites.
Exactly. Right? And it's hard to get out of that mindset because you kind of, and I've learned a little bit of this, with a lot of my kids. I have a couple of my kids that come from some pretty hard places, and there's in one chapter of the book, we kind of talk about dealing with conflict. And one of the areas I really dig into is understanding sort of the human brain and, the different areas that motivate people. And, when you see people lash out of how they're sort of thinking more into the lower brain, which is sort of more the reactionary parts of your brain versus your upper brain that's more logical. But then also the other half of it is, I talk with projects that kind of wonder if people are coming in, and I kind of point out to them, I say, well, come sit in the shoes of the contributors. Maybe a project, nobody knows how to get involved. Like maybe they want to, but they don't know where even to start. Or even one time, and I have one project I joked about this with, is you realize that people in your community think that you are at the top of this mountaintop so high that there is no way that they feel that they can measure up.
You're not accessible.
Yeah, and sometimes it's nothing you have done, but it's just your position and your role within there. Like, and it's hard to kind of get past. And you meet these people and you talk to them, and they're just like chill people you can chat with all day, have a go out to have a a dinner and all sorts of with. But it's sort of those mindsets that if as you're a maintainer you don't think about, and then as your contributor you're also sort of not thinking about, and you might also be thinking as a contributor of your own sort of personal biases, or maybe your own apprehensions and your own sort of sense of self-worth and all of those things that hinder you of wanting to contribute, because you might have a cool idea but you may not think you're good enough to do it. And so anyways, I'm kind of a little bit going in a lot of different directions there, but it just talks to really how delicate and how nuanced all of these interactions become.
Yep. I think part of it too, though, John, is that if you're involved in an open source project, or you're using open source and you look at, is this a project I want to be involved in? Is this because there's the pure user who says, yeah, I have a problem this little piece of code here solves. And I'm using that code and all's fine and dandy in the world. Then maybe I modified it and I want to contribute it back. Or maybe I wanted to do something else and I want to see, are there others out there like me who want that to work this way? And, I need some help or what have you. And that's how people kind of get pulled into these communities. But the reality is, right? I don't care how big your open source community is. You could probably count the people who actually contribute code on your hands and toes.
Oh, yeah.
For the most part, right? The average open source project probably has less than 20 code contributors or something like that. And, and then the other, look, if 96% of the people who are using your open source project are just using the pure open source and don't pay any money for support training or the commercial version or the hosted version or whatever your business model is to monetize this project, if that's what you're doing, a 96% people who don't do it, but 4% of the people are, you're crushing it. 4% of the users paying means you've got a very successful open source project.
Isn't it crazy?
I know, but you gotta wrap your head around those numbers to understand what does success look like here.
And that's the other thing. And then combine that with where are you at in your project's maturity? Because success is measured a lot of different ways.
Yep.
I think we talk a little bit, I think the commercialization chapter where we talk about the Maltic open source project. Maltic is a open source marketing automation platform. And you can see sort of through their journeys of time of where they're trying to measure where their success is at. In the early days, it's very user centric. But then they're like, okay, well, we want to build a community around this. And whenever I hear somebody, I want to build a community around something, that's about the most broad statement you could possibly make. Okay,
absolutely.
What kind of community? Like, what do you expect from this community? What does the community want out of this? And so you can sort of see some of those thought processes that begin to sort of change over time. where kind of both groups are sort of defining in a way like what is sort of the interaction model and where do the roles of people fit in. And frankly, contributing code is an important part of it, but it's not it. There's a lot around it. You know, all those users that maybe don't think they can contribute code could be the same people that are out there answering questions, because that's just as important. Or those people are finding the right questions, and then you're able to poke that and realize, oh, I should fix something upstream for it. So it's just so, I like I said, Alan, I'm always fascinated by the dynamic models here, because it's not, I mean, not that any like business is a very linear one in a lot of ways, but with open source projects, you almost have this contract with your community that is sort of understood, that these are the expectations of sort of what you're bringing, and these are the expectations of what they're bringing. And when that starts to break down is sort of where you see things start to hit, the rocks and it get complicated. But if you sort of see that homeostasis continue to occur, things roll on and things are doing great, but it's intentional. You got to pay attention to it. You have to put the hard work into it. And oftentimes you see people that start open source projects, they're technologists, and that's not a skill that comes very native.
Right. And it not only is it not a skill, it's not a passion. And as I said earlier, if you're not passionate about it, it's a job.
Oh yeah, you're passionate about the technology you built, but not necessarily about the community around
about running it.
Yeah.
And that brings two of the final chapters in the book are things that you don't see discussed very much around open source communities, and that is transitioning leadership and then sunsetting, right? Because no one thinks about those when we start a project or we're building a community. But I've seen this in real life. People's lives move on. They work at different companies. They work in different fields. There's new technology that is the apple of their eye. Mm-hmm. And they're not interested in being that guy or that gal anymore in this community. They love the community. They'll help when they can, but they've got other fish to fry, other mountains to climb.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, not a lot, but I've seen projects kind of die out when that charismatic, founder, leader, community person moves on, and maybe a lot of people follow them on, right? And then there's a vacuum, mm-hmm. and it could go one of two ways, right? You can get a new generation of leaders, right? People who've maybe been in the background have a chance to step out and step forward, or frankly not.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that it's hard. I mean, owning a business, one of the things you always have to think about is succession planning.
Sure.
And
I don't mean like the HBO show necessarily, just to be clear.
No. But I mean, even if you talk to any Fortune 500 company, the second a board appoints a new CEO, the first thing that board's thinking about is the succession plan, what comes after that CEO.
Yep.
And
absolutely,
it's hard for an open source project to think that, because usually they're just so nascent and early on that it's the last thing you're thinking about. You're in huge growth mode, and so you're trying to pull this all together. The funny thing is, when I'm usually kicking off new open source projects, and we sort of have like a technical steering committee, most of the ones I work with are structured that way. We have this awkward moment at the first meeting where we're trying to elect a chairperson and everyone's really quiet. And then all of a sudden somebody says, well, I think such and such would be good at it, or hey, I'd be happy to maybe do it for a little while. And immediately everyone jumps on and say, yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, you should do it. Yeah, you should do it. And then I always say, well, let's do a vote here before this person changes their mind.
Yeah. Or someone talks some sense to them. But go
exactly. Ahead. But it's a really important thing. But at the same time, like you said, just because you start a project, just because you're early on, doesn't mean you're chained to it forever. And but you have to respect the fact that there's users that are going to take this technology and they are going to use it for a long period of time.
Yep. And you can't let them, you don't want to leave them holding the bag. I mean, life happens and we all recognize that.
Yeah.
And then, look, unfortunately, I always say old technology never dies; it just fades away, like Douglas MacArthur, right?
Mhm.
But sometimes you do, open source projects kind of die out. You end of life them, you sunset them, right? And how does one do that in a way that doesn't leave people holding the bag, that doesn't put companies in a bad place, right? And open source is funny, John, because one could always say, okay, the project may be dying out, but you know what? The code is open. I'm just going to continue to maintain it and evolve it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And of course, people are free to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's sort of the fun, interesting part of it, because if you think about it from like a product perspective, the end of life a product, and there's a lot of parallels between it, but at the same token, there's also some uniquenesses for it. Somebody can resurrect this. The code's going to be out there forever. And you oftentimes you will see occasionally in open source. I actually had a project a couple weeks ago that did this, that was sunsetted, and somebody came out of the woodwork and said, hey, this code's really useful. There's some things I'd like to do with it. And they restarted the project and they got it re-going again. And, so sunsetting isn't always for a negative reason. And I think that's an also important thing to think about. It's not a question of failure. It's just a question of life. It's a question of
it's the circle of life, my friend.
Yeah, things make a run, and it solves a thing for a period of time. And eventually, just like all fashion trends, what's old is new, and sometimes these things come back around.
It's recycled back. Absolutely. Hey, John, we're running low on time.
Yes,
can I ask you to hold that book up again?
Sure can.
All right. So it's Open Source Projects Beyond Code. John, it's available on Amazon.
Yes.
And most other book outlets as well, I'm going to assume.
Yep.
And there's obviously the printed version that we see there, but there's a Kindle version or an ebook version.
There's a Kindle ebook version, yeah.
What about audio?
I do not believe there's an audio version.
There's something else to work on.
Maybe that's what I'll be doing, is the 100 hours of reading my book for audio. Maybe that would be something to do. I like that.
Sounds like a plan. Can't wait.
Yes.
John, it's been great spending time with you, just you, on the Open Mainframe project. Yeah. It was fun.
It was fun. This was a lot of fun.
Congratulations on the book. I know, even though it was a labor of love, it was nevertheless a labor, and it takes a lot of time and effort. So congratulations. Well done.
Thank you.
Check it out. It's Open Source Projects Beyond Code by my friend John Murdoch. John, we're going to be back next week, though, with our Open Mainframe project, and we're going to have the panel again.
We're going to get the panelists all back in here. So this was just a quick reprieve from that, but then we're going to go right back at it.
All right. And just a reminder, as I said earlier, our team is actually out in Vancouver. By the time you see this, they'll be home at the Linux Foundation Open Source Summit. A couple of different organizations, I think OpenSSF and CDF. We're doing some, show conferences within the conference, but the Open Mainframe project conference was it October, November, September?
Yeah, so we're going to be doing an announcement on this, but we're on one part, we're partnering with our Finos Foundation at their Open Source and Finance forum. And then we are working on another partnership, which I don't think we almost have everything settled on. So we'll be able to talk about it after our next episode a little bit, but that's coming up very similar in time to that.
And we're looking forward to being there in person on that one and doing some video.
Yep.
John, thanks again. We will see you on the next edition of the Open Mainframe Project by Techstrong and the Linux Foundation. But until then, this is Alan Schimmel. Take care, everyone. We'll see you soon.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond, CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and Techstrong.tv.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hello and welcome back to ServiceNow Knowledge 2023. We're here with Vasant and Lou, and we're talking about security operations and risk, not in the platform, but on the platform, which is a fundamentally different thing. Lou, welcome to the show.
Welcome. Or thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Pleasure.
We've seen security operations be shifted more and more towards IT departments, and of course, ServiceNow being the house that ITSM built. Is security operations and ITSM starting to converge more, and is that part of why you have this offering? What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, so we're seeing a couple of things. So we're seeing security teams need to interact with IT teams a lot. And historically, we've seen that be email, spreadsheets, back and forth between teams. And what we're seeing on ServiceNow with customers that have adopted our security operations is that they're driving end-to-end workflows right across those two teams. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So like one example is around vulnerability management, or historically, the security team would own a tool that assesses vulnerabilities in the landscape, right? And then they would say, hey, put in an email together to, they might find 1 million vulnerabilities. Well, 100,000 need to go to this team, 100,000 need to go to that team, and they send an email with a big spreadsheet, right? And what we're trying to do is we're trying to break down those silos and get those teams to work better together with a consistent workflow, right? And where everybody's on the same page from an information perspective. What needs to be done, by when, how, right? And so we're seeing that the security operations on the platform enables that better collaboration across security and IT.
Yeah. Of course, governance, risk, and compliance, fondly known as GRC, is a close cousin to security. So is it a similar conversation? Are we seeing the same type of convergence starting to happen?
Across the board. So when you think about risk and compliance, honestly, if you do anything, there's some risk related to that. There's compliance related to it. I'm sitting in a building. I'm sure someone's worried about health and safety. Mm-hmm. If I have my phone, I know my phone has controls from ServiceNow to make sure it doesn't get hacked. So as soon as you start talking about technology and you look at ServiceNow's footprint across technology, you go, hey, customers are putting stuff on the cloud. Customers are putting hardware assets in place. There's risk related to obsolescence of the products. They have software and software applications in place. There's cyber risks related to them. And then there is also vendor risks related to them, because the vendor may go out of business or they may have a huge breach, in which case we both care about this because data is at a loss. So as soon as you have technology in place, technology supporting business, this is all critical. Resilience. A bank that I was talking to at some point in time, their router went down or some network infrastructure went down. Suddenly, for 24 hours, their customers could not get to their money. And you go, oh, that's a problem. And so this connects where so much of our life is now technology driven, and ServiceNow sits at the heart of managing that technology for our customers, connecting that to risk to make sure it's super resilient. We're worried about the cyber point of view, put in place controls in place, put in place vulnerability response, security incident response, and a whole bunch of things related to that. Connect to the top of the house, to the business services and third parties, everything else that's related to it. That is what we help our customers do.
You talked about reducing the friction, but it also seems to me that I've always had to have applications to go manage security or GRC, but I built them on a separate stack. If I put them on the ServiceNow platform, am I not in some way reducing the total cost of security operations because I'm not having to support an entire separate stack of software for that particular application?
Well, I think the answer is there's a yes part and there's a no part, right? Like, so I'll do the yes part first, which is yes, we are seeing customers consolidate certain solutions onto the ServiceNow platform, right? It's a platform layer that can serve security use cases, IT use cases, et cetera. But there are certain things we don't do, right? And so for that, we have to make sure that we're integrating with the tools and systems that customers have in place today. That's a big part of our security strategy, right? So endpoint-related tools, network-related tools, vulnerability scanners, things of that nature that we're good at workflows and assets and applying those to security problems, right? Not necessarily that detection layer out at the different control points. So we integrate with those, but in terms of, I talk to a lot of customers that might have 20 different case management systems across 20 different security departments. That is ripe for consolidation onto the platform. Single offering, single case management system, data isolation when needed, but enabling collaboration when needed as well.
So I may use you to create the policy, but the execution is still back on wherever the device or wherever the endpoint is.
That's correct. Yep, absolutely. Yep.
We hear a lot about GRC in highly regulated industries, but I think to your earlier point, one industry is not regulated these days. It seems like everybody's going to need GRC at some point.
And everybody does. So just like every industry needs technology, and if you look at ServiceNow's customer base, same thing is true of risk and compliance. Historically, risk and compliance used to be much more prevalent in financial services, highly regulated for the longest time, and so we saw a lot higher maturity and need from financial services customers. That has evolved. We see a lot more on technology, particularly with data privacy, technology supporting business needs, AI now coming into play, and the risks related to that, responsible AI, a whole bunch of things related to it. Retail, it all goes to not just regulation driven, but a growing maturity and the awareness of the role risk and compliance plays in everything.
What are you hearing from customers about data privacy? It seems like there's a lot of legislation floating around out there. It's in different shapes in different states and in different places around the world, but it seems like it's coming in a much bigger way than it has been here thus far.
Honestly, the path to data privacy started driving much higher awareness as soon as we started getting GDPR a few years ago. So the world is today at a point where data privacy as a compliance thing and getting people more access to how the data is used is in a much better place than it was 5 years ago. However, that has evolved since to broader places where this is applicable. I'll give you a very simple example. When we train our data models for AI, there's privacy information, related information in there. And so the governance related to how your AI model works includes how your governance related to the data that fed into that worked. And so there are much broader implications on just focusing on how data is used and consumed across the enterprise, and privacy implications and a whole bunch related to that.
We've been talking about AI all week here. How will AI be applied to security operations, do you think? What should people be looking forward to?
Yeah, I think we're in the early stages, but there's a huge potential, right? And I think some use cases will be more generalized across the ServiceNow platform, and some will be security specific. So for example, one, I think, general use case that'll be applicable to security, but also a lot of other areas is, I've got a major incident, right? Major security incident in this case. Give me an executive summary of this so that I can inform the right people, right? There's all kinds of records associated with it. Could be hundreds, thousands of artifacts. But summarize this for me. What's the right information to send to my executives? I think that's a pretty simple one. But then there's others when you look at the security domain and the specifics around the customer environment, right? How are similar customers responding to this type of incident? Can you summarize that in a way for me that is usable but maintains the right privacy, right, across the customer base? I think there's some really interesting examples that again, we're at the early stages, but we're investing this year, right? So that we're going to realize.
GRC can be mind-numbing work. The documents can be 400 pages long that you're supposed to figure out how to comply with. So is AI going to help us with that?
Yeah, it's definitely going to help us with that. In fact, honestly, this has been an area in AI that has been true for a few years now. There are companies out there that will try to parse regulatory documents and pull out the nuggets of what's relevant. An active area of research, even in the past, has been contracts. How do you extract contractual terms from documents? And even at ServiceNow, there's now an offering called Doc and Tell, which helps you start doing things like that. So there are things across the board which are summarizing information, extracting insights from data, large data sets that are or unstructured documents, and lots of different data sets. Constantly see use cases.
Security is not an easy job these days. What's your sense of, are we still going to be shorthanded by millions of people as we move along, or are we getting to the point where if more IT people are participating in security, that we'll get to the right balance finally? We'll still need security folks who are specialists, but it's becoming a different world where it's not just all left to the security people.
Yeah, well, so I think, I do think we're going to continue to see a shortage in the security skill set. But I think that, but I do actually think that ServiceNow can help with that, right? Because we see in a lot of our customers with process, with workflow, with automation, right? With some of the AI capabilities that we already have in the platform, we can help the existing teams scale to higher incident volumes, right? So I think that I'm not of the opinion that we're gonna, we've had a shortage of security professionals for a while. I don't think that's going to go away. But I think you're right in that we have to help the people that are there scale, and then we have to help connect and collaborate, improve the collaboration between security and IT teams to drive improved efficiency.
On the GRC side, do we have enough people to handle all the tasks that we're looking at?
I don't think it's a simple answer. For risk and compliance, the world's slightly different. So in risk and compliance, the goal, and I suspect that's also true in security, is you really want everyone who's doing their day job to be better at doing their job.
Yep.
So if I did my job in a way that was aware of security considerations, so I'm careful where I use my phone, how I use, where I browse to, and I'm a good citizen, right? I'm doing business ethically. You've reduced the load on risk and compliance. Is everybody's role in the enterprise. It's not the risk and compliance team's job. So in that sense, those teams are essentially always working to make sure everyone else is doing it. So over time, the teams have grown and wind and wax for different reasons, but it's not in the same way. And there's a lot of different subdomains. The people will focus on enterprise-wide risk. There are people who focus on cyber risk. There are people who focus on technology risk that's not cyber risk. There will be people who focus on third-party risk, business continuity. There's a lot of different domains, and there's always some level of availability or dearth of professionals.
All right, guys, let's tease something here. What's the next great thing coming down in security operations from ServiceNow?
So one of the things we just talked about in keynote this morning at Knowledge was something we're calling security posture control. So I said earlier, like ServiceNow, and I'm generalizing a little bit, but we're really strong at workflows and automation and asset understanding, and this is really the marriage of those two things, right? So tell me, I'm supposed to have an endpoint solution installed on these assets. Is it there, right? And if not, help me fix it. I'm supposed to have vulnerability scan coverage across my entire estate. Do I? And if not, drive the right priority to fix that. So I'm really excited about this, and I think this ties in really nicely to risk and compliance as well.
And the next great thing from you guys?
I'm going to change that slightly and say the next thing that our customers that we see a lot of people concerned about now. So it's not something that we're releasing in the fall. ESG has been a hot topic. And as historically, people have looked at environmental, social, and governance and said, we're going to report on this. I'm just collecting a bunch of data and reporting, but regulators are getting in the game. And CSRD in the European Union was approved last fall. And so increasingly, it's not just about just putting data out there in a report. It has to be auditable. You cannot make misstatements because it's a public corporation and there's regulators looking at it. So connecting ESG to the compliance aspects of it is becoming increasingly important for a lot of our customers. And so if there's something I'm really excited about, it's leading customers to that level of maturity where they're able to drive impact with ESG data collection, action in a way that's compliant and that's not greenwashing.
Cool. Hey, folks, now that we know that security and risk and compliance is everybody's job, some effort is going into making it a lot easier for everybody than it has been in the past. Gentlemen, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
All right. And we'll be back in a minute.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hello and welcome back to ServiceNow Knowledge 2023. We're here with Ahmed Zagsina from ServiceNow, and we've got Stephen Locke-Campbell from the USDA. We're talking about all things automation. Ahmed, welcome to the show.
Welcome. Always a pleasure to be here.
People are throwing around the buzz phrase hyper-automation. We've been doing automation since, I don't know, they put mainframes in buildings in the first floor of New York City to automate insurance forms in the 50s. What's changing? What's different? What's hyper-automation about?
Well, other than that buzzword, there's quite a few things that changed, Mike. So first, around this decade, as you're talking about from IBM mainframe days, all of these technologies did have a purpose to try to automate as much as possible, but they were purpose-built for a specific set of use case. So they start misused for all variety of things. Now, as you fast forward, you start looking at a lot of AI-based technology with IDP, document capture, RPAs, now generative AI. What you need is a toolbox to be able to pick right technology for the right use case. So that's one of the paramount pillar of hyperautomation. The second thing which hyperautomation indicates is speed of innovation. We are not in the time where it's going to take you weeks and months and years to be implementing your automation projects. Business users are demanding 3 to 4 weeks from the time they get your request. So how can you move faster? And that brings up all this tooling we are talking about, seamlessly, automatically integrated with pre-built assets and use of AI to deliver that. And the third thing which has changed drastically all of this needs in the last 4 to 5 years is our experience. Customer experience, supplier experience, partner experience, or whatever you call it. The end users are demanding a better experience for whatever they touch and use. So the short answer is hyperautomation is bringing all these three pillars together, and there is no better time in the world than today.
All right. Stephen, government agencies, the one thing we all know about them, they have processes and lots of paperwork.
We do, and the other thing that we're experts at is more with less, right? So we've got the same amount of workload, if not more, with a third or less of the staff. So we have to move faster, and we have to, be able to really bridge gaps where they exist, and we have to cross those bridges.
Are there particular areas of automation that you guys are prioritizing? What's kind of top of mind for you?
So for me right now, I'm working on a project to eliminate duplicative data entry. Pretty low-hanging fruit. I know, it's not super sexy. It's not saving trillions of dollars, but it makes a couple of employees' lives better. It eliminates errors in data entry. It eliminates the data entry itself. An RPA bot doesn't take vacation time. It doesn't have to worry that there are 3 Mondays this year that are holidays that start pay periods, right? So what we're working on is for payroll, and we don't have to worry about those employee or human-based things like mistakes, like vacation time, like life happening to a robot.
Yeah. How are we going about that? Because this is a pet peeve of mine forever. I mean, you go to the doctor's office and I'm entering the same data again and again and again. Every time I go there, everywhere I go, I got to enter the same data over and over again.
I just did that last.
And they're telling me that they know me, and I'm like, I don't get it.
Not really.
So, what is the challenge? Because we've been at this for a while. And from your perspective, when you talk to other customers, what is the issue? We talk about digital transformation all the time. We know we have these paper-based processes. One wise person once said there'll be a paperless bathroom before there'll be a paperless office. They're probably still right. But what are you seeing as the hurdle?
Well, there are certain industries who are able to take on and move faster. Now, finance, even though we can complain about complex processes, they are cutting edge in deploying all these technologies. Nowadays, your loans can get approved in under 90 seconds. I was vacationing in Hawaii and lost my credit card. Real story, Mike, right? And here I am, traditional calling to a credit card company, I've lost it, so because I don't want it getting misused, right? Bank of American Express, here they say, no worries, where are you, in Hawaii? We can overnight the card to you, all right? From their systems, okay, I love it. But what magical thing happened after that? In 30 minutes, I get a text saying that your Apple Watch digital wallet has been updated with the new card. I don't even know the number. In 10 minutes, I had a card which I could go and use it, right? That's hyper automation. Now, in the case of these medical and life sciences and insurance, things are moving slow because of a lot of it is compliance related. Some of this is even the digital leaders buying that vision, which finance leaders have bought in. That my goal, I don't want to have my nurse spending 30% of the time doing a patient transfer from one to others. Nurses do not join to be doing the patient transfer paperwork. And once they realize that there are better automation technologies available, in which we have demonstrated it, they soon realize that employee satisfaction score going up. They have more time available. They can take care of their patients better, right? And they don't have to pick up a phone just to check if it validates the insurance claim, whether they're going to take it, which is available, which is not available. So I think it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Certain industries are moving faster and all, and that's where the maturity curve of digital transformation comes in. And we have some work to do.
The perception is that employees are resistant to change, but what do you see when you bring in automation? What's the culture like? What's the general vibe you get from the people you're working with?
So once we're able to actually articulate that, a machine isn't replacing your job, it's replacing the parts of your job that we all hate, that are critically important, like payroll. Getting paid I find it to be very important. But we're able to focus that employee on higher value tasks. To his point, the reason that they joined wasn't to take data from one system and put it into another. Especially in government, it was to make a difference, right? That's why we're all here, is to make the United States government, especially in the department, run better, be better, and more efficient. And once you identify that and explain that, our staff has been really receptive. They're like, wait, I can actually do my job instead of all of the paperwork.
We need more people like Steve. They get it and they unlock this value, and then it just goes viral.
We've been talking about AI all week.
Yes.
What should people expect from AI as it applies to automation? I mean, it could be the next big kicker for innovation, but what's real and what's, theoretical?
Right. We've made several announcements this morning, Mike, but let's talk about 2 or 3 things which really makes the automation and making all of our product and engineering guys super excited. A part of building any automation is the developer tooling. The time somebody has to spend time in building. So that's where we can use generative AI right at the get-go, like next best action, using a large-scale model, right? Using a pre-existing training sets. So that will speed up your time for development. Second thing is around the requirements gathering process. Many times, in order to understand what you're automating, somebody's describe you. Now we can take that text input, convert that text to flow, text to app directly with the advanced algorithms which are available right now. Instead of you drawing a old classic Visio chart or drawing the 3-page requirement document, you can interact to indicate your requirements. Once your requirements are understood, your end automation is going to be much more robust, faster, and quicker. So that's one side of it, developer tooling. The second side of it is once we unlock certain AI services to the end users, just like in the past, classic example is fraud detection or things like that. You can now have similar services like content summarizations of all your cases, generic prompt for Q&A, your AI search. Our AI search or other searches does a pretty good job. They give you 3 different articles, but they still expect you to read those 3 articles. Now, I can take those 3 articles which came in, which was relevant, send it to a Gen AI for summarization, and get a 1-page summary of it. So that saved a tremendous time for me. Again, going back to what Steven, you were talking about, can I, first of all, be relevant, highly accurate, and saves me 9 extra minutes of time of getting that data. So happy employees, more accuracy. So that kind of things I'm more excited about, because we as product people, we want to unlock multiple use cases across customer workflows, employee workflows, and creator workflows so that they can use it for the use cases they want to use it for.
Not entirely sure about that use case, because what I heard is I should just write the summary and skip the article.
You can do so as well if you have a teleprompter written down, or sorry, a prompt written down for exactly asking for that. But I am sure it's going to happen someday.
Is the approach to this, therefore, that I should just kind of make a list of the 10 things I hate about my job, and then we can start knocking them off through automation? I mean, is that a viable way to go?
It's a great way to start a conversation. You know, I'm not an expert in all of the things for which I have oversight, right? Or I'm not an expert in the nuanced process of each workflow that my division, has. But what I do know is I can't elicit that information. I can't generate those requirements without actually engaging with staff who have done this for their entire career. So I think that it's an evolution, and you're never really done, but you have to have somewhere to start a conversation. Now, one of the things that's really important is just because you can use a tool like RPA doesn't mean that you should. And actually on my project, we had a few different tools in the toolbox, and we struck them out for various reasons, and we landed on RPA because it met requirements in a way that nothing else really did. And I think that that's, to your point about having a full toolkit, is RPA especially isn't the end-all be-all to everything. AI isn't going to be the end-all be-all to everything. But if we can use a little bit of everything to get it all better, then we've made that progress. We've helped that employee. And honestly, asking employees what you hate about your job, take it with a grain of salt, of course, but it's a great place to start that conversation of what are we doing? Why do our processes not meet what our employees expect?
Right. You might not get the answer you're looking for because, they
Yes, you may have to put the right prompt around it, as you said before.
There you go. We have had automation forever and a day, and as far as I can tell, we have now millions of islands of automation. So do we need to kind of think this through a little bit and say, how are we going to stitch all these integrations and automations together in a way that creates something that's cohesive? What's the next step for where
You're talking about the technologies, or are you talking about customers' experience, or both?
The customers and the platforms, if you look around them, they have all kinds of things that they have automated in isolation from everything else. But it feels like we need to, as part of some digital transformation, integrate and unify all that. So how do we get there?
I think that comes back to the philosophy we've been trying to bring out in the market from ServiceNow with our hyper automation. Now it gets shielded most of the time because of a lot of noise in the around and the nature of this word, which everybody understands is differently the moment you start throwing automation fabric and hyper automation. But one important principle from ServiceNow as we think about hyper automation, or anybody who wants us to look at us as a credible vendor, is we have truly taken a time to deliver all these tooling kits, which Steve, you were talking about, AI, RPA, integration, all on a single platform. And what that means is truly all of these technologies can exchange the data seamlessly. You don't have to integrate the automation technologies themselves. The second part is, some of it is future-proof, Mike, to your point. So 4 months ago or 5 months ago, we had no direct plans of launching Gen AI to the level what we are doing right now. Many companies did not have it. But because of the solid nature of our architecture, of our platforms and all, guess what? The speed of innovation we are launching. We have launched tons of Gen AI initiatives. In fact, every single product team in ServiceNow is working on it. And we are bringing it to the market May 4th, we already had a Gen AI controller. Now, guess what? What customer has to do? None of our customers have to upgrade anything. Their investment in ServiceNow, they are realizing the value. So that's the difference we are seeing with eliminating the islands of automations. And now, that doesn't mean that you need only single team going forward, because that's not possible. You don't want to be the unpopular guy saying that, well, let's bring all the automations into a single team. Nobody's going to buy that. You want to still continue doing decentralized teams. However, the difference is, guys, when you set up your decentralized team, use a single platform so you can reuse, discover, and have the right set of governance. But let them move at their own speed. Right, that's the difference.
If I could just pick up a little bit, I think having a vision and a holistic approach is really important. You have to have leadership in place and that empower staff to say, okay, what's next? We've done all of these things in our silos, which we spent time knocking down, right? And we've re-siloed. We have to knock them down again to an extent and think about the way that we can, okay, now that we're all in the same pool, and the commonality of the platform is a conversation that I have weekly is, I already have access to this data. Let me use X, Y, and Z. So I think having a leadership vision that says, okay, we did this, what's next? How do we keep optimizing? How do we keep improving? And then you get to use the cool new tools that ServiceNow is putting out in the marketplace.
What do you know now that you kind of wish you knew a year ago, maybe 2 years ago when you first started this whole thing?
I wish that I knew how well it was all going to work. When we first started talking about RPA, we explored a couple of different vendors, and there was just some components, and we'd heard rumors that there was ServiceNow RPA in the pipeline. And I wish that I would have known that it was going to be as robust and that the design studio was going to be honestly as fun as it is to use. Because we probably would have put a pin in a couple of things and said, we're going to solve this in a really amazing way in 6 months, in a year, in 18 months. So a little bit of that crystal ball, a little bit of behind the scenes on the roadmap, but I wouldn't change anything, I don't think.
All right. I think that was a request. Are you going to share more in the roadmap and let people know what's coming down the pike a little more aggressively?
We did, but I'm always there to do this more, right? And as the time permits, I can throw some of the things which are coming in the pipeline. But we had a packed roadmap session, 2 of them, all of them with standing room only, about what's coming in and where we are taking this across the whole automation engine. And the thing is, people are realizing is what Steve was saying is, when we talk about automation, we're not talking just about RPA. We're talking about integrations, document intelligence, and RPA. Plus, we're giving them a tool to manage all 4 of them in a way which, as Steve's kind of increases his team bit and have a more optimal use of his time and decentralized or centralized, whatever model he decides to implement at USDA. So that's another sort of areas of investments we are doing, other than the fact that Gen AI.
And even low tech, just a simple API, right? Like that's still a great tool.
Yes.
And it's in the toolbox. And I think, just as many options to accomplish, to torture a metaphor, to skin the cat as many ways as possible, I think is never a bad thing.
It's never about it. And then to that point, one more, just a quick plug here. We do integrations, as you know. We have 180 plus spokes, as you know. But we also have something called custom spokes framework, meaning customers can write to endpoints. With our upcoming Vancouver release, Michael, we are launching something called Spoke Generator. Any endpoint with an API specification, you point to it, it will create a spoke for you in under 2 minutes. And that would make the integration much more easier for people like Steve and his team. So that's what we are doing.
All right, folks, you heard it here. Before you roll out that duct tape and start getting the baling wire together to stitch something together, check out the product roadmap. Hey, guys.
Thank you. Pleasure for being here.
Mike, thanks so much.
All right. And we'll be back in a minute.
Discover the cutting-edge insights of our new show, AI Times, a series that explores the limitless potential of artificial intelligence. Sponsored by the AI Infrastructure Alliance, the AI Times is at the forefront of the AI revolution, tackling the crucial questions of how we can leverage AI for the betterment of humanity. Stay ahead of the curve as this show delves into all things surrounding AI, including trends, pressing concerns, and the positive impact AI is making around the globe. AI Times.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Techstrong Women, where we feature amazing women doing amazing things in tech. I'm Jody Ashley, executive producer here at Techstrong, and I'm here with my co-host, Tracy Reagan, creator and CEO of Deploy Hub. And in her free time, she's busy working with the Linux Foundation, where she sits on the boards of the OpenSSF and the CDF Technical Oversight Committee. Before I introduce today's guest, I want to give you a quick update about what's happening here at Techstrong. Be sure to register for Techstrong Cloud Native Now on July 11th. Speaker submissions are still open, and as you know, we always love sponsors. You can register for all of our events by going to techstrongevents.com, and be sure to tune in every day to Techstrong TV for great shows and interviews. Hey, Tracy, what's on your mind today?
Well, thank you so much for reminding us about getting our talks in. I think you ladies out there, we need you to do talks. In fact, next week we have CDCon is May 8th and 9th. OpenSSF is the 10th. And between I think it's the 9th and the 11th is Open Source Summit. And that's all happening in Vancouver. So if you are able to make it, please come. I get to do a keynote for the Open Source Summit. Super excited about that. So I hope to see you all there. But on another note, some interesting things have happened in the world of SBOMs. And for most of you who have attended shows that I've been at, you know that I like to talk about SBOMs. I've been talking about them since 1995. I called them build audit reports at the time. But this happened back in December in a very quiet way. All of you may know about the Biden administration's requirement. If you deliver software to the government, you have to include a software bill of material report. It's always been a very controversial topic, and one that I have talked about many times, indicating that SBOMs are useless if we don't consume the data. And there's so much data in an SBOM that just having an SBOM doesn't necessarily solve the problem. It begins to solve the problem, but it's only the first step. It's the data. Sitting in a text file is kind of useless, to be quite honest. Well, in December, somebody finally agreed with me. The Information Technology Industry Council, it's a lobbying group for the big companies like Google, Amazon. I'm assuming IBM is part of it. They actually wrote a letter to the Biden administration and said, hey, you know what? Maybe this is a premature idea. And I'm going to read what I put this little note in here. It said, given the current level of immaturity, we believe that SBOM requirements are too soon yet. The SBOM conversation needs more time to standardize SBOMs to make sure they're scalable for all software categories and agencies. So we as a community need to continue this conversation about consuming SBOMs. Now, I'm in charge of a community for an open source project at the Linux Foundation called Ortelius. Deploy Hub is based on it. And that's everything that we do. So I was very happy to see this. Validation helps, right? Sometimes I think I'm not taken serious and I'm saying, yeah, you create an SBOM, what good is it sitting in a text file in a build directory? Does absolutely no good unless we begin to consume the data. And the thing about SBOMs is that they have an enormous amount of data in them, enormous. And if we think about AI, you can't do AI without data. So we have a massive amount of data that we collectively as a group are generating in these SBOMs, and we're leaving it in a text file. Breaks my heart. But now the Information Technology Industry Council has brought it up and said, hey, Biden administration, maybe you ought to put some pressure on the government figuring out how to consume the SBOM information before we bother sending it to you, because it may be an onerous requirement if you're not going to do anything with it except check off a box. Doesn't solve our cybersecurity by checking off a box. So it's out there, everybody. We got to start consuming SBOMs. That's my tip for the week.
Always a good tip for the week from Tracy. All right. Well, let's get rolling into our interview. I'd like to introduce you all to Kathy Park with Andre Capital. Kathy, jump in, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about what you're up to.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks for having me on. So I am a partner at Andre Capital. We're a Silicon Valley-based growth and late-stage technology investment firm. We focus on companies primarily raising Series E, F, or later, so ideally 1 to 3 years prior to IPO. We tend to focus a bit more on enterprise-related technologies, so things like cybersecurity, AI, big data, SaaS, cloud computing, and other business enablement technology, including things like, and then sectors like fintech. I came to Andra, actually, I'd originally met the team back in 2018 when they were just founding the firm. I was at Goldman at the time where I spent 18 years of my career and ended up just staying in touch with the team and being really impressed by the progress that they've made over the last few years, including during a global pandemic and one of the rockiest, most volatile tech markets that I think we've seen in the better part of a decade. So I'm excited to be there. I'm a partner. I'm responsible for business development and also sit on the investment committee at Andra.
That's a handful.
I waited. I knew Tracy would have something good there.
So you have a background in both finance and technology, which is impressive. I was a geek from the very beginning, but in the school that I went to, we had to take business classes if we were going to be in the computer sciences. And I hated finance. I was terrible at it. Of course, now I use it all the time. I appreciate a balance sheet today, but in college, I didn't so much. How did you get yourself into both technology and finance? They're very different. Maybe they both have math associated to them, but that's about it.
Yeah, I mean, I fell into finance by accident. So I grew up in Virginia. I was surrounded by normal professions, didn't know anything about finance or banking. My assumption was that I had 3 choices in life. I was either going to be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. And so I was at, my high school was a science and technology focused high school. It's pretty well known. It's called Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology. So needless to say, I assumed I was going to be either, some sort of a scientist, a doctor, engineer, that type of thing. And then when I was in college, I ended up, it was a liberal arts college. And so I was required to take lots of different types of classes. And I ended up taking economics, thinking that was really interesting. I'd always done debate in high school, of all things. And so sort of really liked the juxtaposition of quantitative with qualitative. And then so I was sort of trucking along, not really knowing what I was going to do. But my junior year, a friend of mine suggested that, it was the summer before my junior year, he had suggested that I apply for this internship on Wall Street. And it's by a group called Sponsors for Educational Opportunity. It's a really fantastic program. And the goal was really to help minorities, really underrepresented minorities, get jobs in finance. So I did that and I loved it. I was placed on a trading floor in debt capital markets and thought it was so exciting. I'd never seen so many people and so much going on. And I also realized it was a really nice combination of things that I knew how to do. So sort of the math and the quantitative aspects. And then also the ability to just interact with people. And so that just, it's sort of one thing led to another. And that's how I got started in finance. But I'm a foiled scientist at heart.
That is really cool, though, that you got that opportunity. At that young of an age, being on that floor. I worked on Wall Street as a programmer. I never was on the floor, but I worked with traders. Oh, my goodness.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all of that. Everything that they've done.
He's apologizing for every trader ever.
They're just mean. Let's just put it that way. They're wound up. They have had too much coffee and they're mean. But what an eye-opening experience for you, really, at that young of an age. Is that opportunity still out there for?
It is, and and that's it's one of these interesting things where there's a greater awareness of trying to create programs, including for women and minorities at an earlier stage to try to recruit more folks that are typically underrepresented in certain fields. And so now these companies are reaching down at an earlier stage and really structuring internships, not just for folks in their junior and senior year, but even as early as freshmen and sophomores and things like that. And so SEO is still very much alive and kicking, and they've expanded the program. So it's not just Wall Street now. They have a law program. They also have an investment professionals program as well. And actually, all of that actually goes towards funding a high school program that SEO sponsors, which is really to help, again, underrepresented minorities essentially get into schools. And so they offer a lot of college preparation classes and things like that. So I think it still exists. And if anything, the good news is these programs have started to expand and proliferate.
They absolutely have. Here in Colorado, I live in Denver, and we have a STEM high school in Denver that's open enrollment to any kids that can qualify. I mean, they have kind of an entrance program because they want to make sure the kids want to be there. And it's a really great program, and it's in a very underrepresented part of Denver. So I love that it's so important for our schools to realize that even at the high school level, these kids have made up their mind. Or if you give them a taste of these things, they'll figure them out very quickly. I think tech is something that kids figure out they're into it pretty quickly and early on. Whereas, some of us slog through college trying to figure out what we wanted to major in. I don't feel like tech is like that. I feel like from everybody we've interviewed, Tracy, you're the same way. Like you got into it and you were there, you were all in, you were ready to do it. So I love the idea of the high school level being expanded more and focused more on these STEM programs.
Yeah, New Mexico tries very hard to build their STEM program. But there's always challenges around it, though, and so much of it is cultural. And in working with some of these programs, I find that it also has to do with your parents' economic profile, and their belief in what is possible, right? So what they have seen is what they pass on to their kids. And oftentimes they don't see college. They don't see themselves being an engineer or a programmer. And so they don't pass it on to their kids. So it has to come from education. It has to come from programs that can open the students' eyes, even though their parents' eyes might be shut. And that is one of the bigger problems, especially with in the areas that I'm in, especially in the more rural areas. They don't even consider girls. They don't even think about sending girls to college. Mm-hmm. That's still a hurdle to overcome. And thinking about a girl going into STEM is even a bigger deal, right? For some of these populations and some of these cultures. So we have a lot of cultural things to kind of overcome in terms of getting more girls and minorities and people below the poverty line, to get them thinking about, hey, maybe getting my kid into school is important. That's why community colleges are so important.
Absolutely.
If we have more focus on STEM in the community colleges, we'll do really well. They have a great one at the community college in Albuquerque, and they produce a lot of good entry-level programmers. So let's move on to things about what you're doing with your career now. So tell us a little bit about some of the companies that you are investing in. What's cool? What's coming up? What you're looking at? What makes you excited? What's the new technology that is really getting your interest?
Sure. And so I would say, just big picture for me, as I mentioned, I'm more of a finance professional, but when I was at Goldman and even after that, in the roles that I'd had since, technology is incredibly exciting. It is, people used to talk about technology as if it were a vertical, and it's a horizontal. It encompasses every single sector and every single industry. And it will increasingly become an important part of our ecosystem, to the point where I think, Tracy, you had mentioned with various communities that don't really, that don't support college, much less women in technology. I think it's so incredibly important for young girls in particular to feel excited and understand how jobs or careers in technology are relevant for them in particular. And so for me, I was starting to see technology really in the financial services sector. And then I realized the exciting things that are happening in healthcare, as well as other sectors that previously you hadn't really seen a lot of technology. And in particular, you're starting to see a focus on AI and big data and data analytics in particular. And that permeates every single industry. And there are lots of industries that are relatively inefficient. What's interesting as well, I know everybody has been talking about AI in the context of ChatGPT, but that's just the most recent manifestation. So at Andra, we believe that AI and big data are going to be incredibly important. And so we've invested in companies, including we tend to invest in these private companies that are a bit under the radar. But we look at companies such as Burbit, which is a natural language processing and machine learning based transcription service. But what they're doing is they've applied it first to the legal sector, but now they're really able to, as you get these data sets and you get better and better at essentially processing this information, you're able to apply it to all sorts of different sectors. And the beauty of machine learning, of course, is that the machine gets smarter and smarter. The more data it has, and the more data points and training points, if you will, that they have. So we invest in that. Not surprisingly, just given this current environment, cybersecurity is something that's very much front and center. And so we've invested in a number of cybersecurity companies as well. And actually, you can look at our website. I don't know how much I'm supposed to talk about the companies that we've invested in, but you can get a sense for the types of companies that we've also invested in. So that's also incredibly exciting. And if you think again about cybersecurity, it used to be something that was something, it was like in movies and espionage, and you always thought of like these male hackers and stuff. But now we're starting to realize that it's just a basic layer of everything that we do. And so it's something that no matter what sector you're in, and this includes everything from hospitals, schools, government institutions, as well as corporations and other places, you do need to have an acute awareness of what cybersecurity and other sort of technology as a whole has as an impact on the companies that you're working in or the fields that you're working in. And so again, people need to be much more sophisticated about things like that. In the past, I could talk a little bit about the companies that we've exited. So Andra has successfully exited from 2 companies that are now public companies. So SoFi in the fintech space, and Palantir which is in the SaaS space. And those are both very exciting. For us, it's exciting to see those companies go public. We think, again, going forward in the future, for us, there are certain sectors that essentially go in and out of favor, but we're relatively agnostic as to what we're focusing on. For us, it's really more about finding the right company with the right management team that's set up to succeed. In particular, also finding management teams that are able to scale these companies from essentially what we think of as more late stage growth companies to public companies that are able to be a standalone entities that are profitable, that are able to continue to grow and grow their market share. So sorry, that's a bit of a longer answer than I had intended, but just to give you a little bit of a sense of some of the types of areas that we've been focused on a little bit more recently. and why?
I think the big data is important. And, I started my talk saying we don't have enough data, centralized data around SBOMs to do anything important or intelligent around the cybersecurity issue. And many industries are like that. For example, if we think about what we're excited about in AI right now is ChatGPT and, Codex, so we can start creating code snippets. They both have some pretty big data lakes. They have Google. They can search a Google and pull out anything you want. I mean, that's a pretty simple AI application. You can do the search yourself, and it's just searching it all for you and putting it together in a nice Grammarly way, let's say. And that's the same way with Codex. They're looking at the GitHub open source repositories, and they're pulling code snippets. But we don't have a good centralized place, for example, for healthcare, because there is a division between, there's a risk-reward balance between protecting our security and having the data available to us. And we haven't done a good job so far of being able to do that, separate the persona that is associated to the data and the data. And, it's probably going to be that Google's going to come up with algorithms to do better healthcare searches based on what people have written about healthcare, in the same way as we sit there and look at, why is my potassium high? And all those kinds of things. So we are asking for that information now, but in some of these industries, we really lack, in a huge way, centralized data that can really provide the AI, the intelligence that we're looking for. Do you see us at any time in the future? It is a very important area. It's the same way in law. It's the same way in many of our car problems. I have a rattle in my car. I want to be able to ask Google that. So we're asking for the information, but we don't necessarily centralize it.
That's right. And, a lot of it is, it's the centralization, it's cleaning up of data. So when you think about data, you're totally right, Tracy. I mean, we collect so much data, but what we don't do is figure out essentially how to catalog it. If you think about books in a library, imagine if you just had a giant pile of books and you had no system for how to search. And so in the same way that it's what Google did for the internet and for data that's available out there now, but and this is also, I think, where the overlay of, artificial intelligence comes in as well, because it's still an incredibly intensive process to be able to think about how do we draw all these connections, how do we see the patterns. So healthcare data, some of the exciting things, on the Andra side, we're not healthcare specialists, but when we focus on health tech, we focus less on the health and more on the technology and the software applications. And so what we're excited and interested to see are the number of companies that essentially take the same forms of pattern recognition and data analytics and understanding correlations, for example, between the fact that, Tracy, you've had a cold multiple times and you also are allergic to XYZ. Oh, and by the way, we gave you antibiotics. Is there something where we can figure out, is there predictive power, or are there certain correlations, and can we compare you and your health record versus everybody else? And so you're absolutely right. And what's going to be really amazing is, so on the Andra side, we're very much focused on B2B, but then there's the angle of B2B to C. And so at some point, you're going to need a medical, today your doctor and the hospital system that you're involved in will have access to that information and be able to provide a diagnosis for you. But it's really not that much longer before you will have those tools in your hand where you'll be able to put in your own data, your symptoms into your iPhone and have it give you information. And so it's really exciting. And, there are a lot of things that are getting us to this point. So again, it's big data, data analytics, computing power. So I mentioned that we look at, sort of cloud but there's, that plus, everything from just having faster, technology as well. And so having devices that can actually have that power. And so it's this convergence. And so people, it's not really a step function. I think it's one of those interesting things where you start to see things go up, and then all of a sudden there will be a breakthrough of some sort, and we see a spike. So it's pretty exciting.
It is. It is. And really, the IT community has finally fixed the computing power problem, right? Exactly. This is the whole idea of Kubernetes and microservices, where you have small functions that you can spin up, go from, what we would call 10 CPUs to 15,000 CPUs in a matter of seconds, in order to have that ability, that brain power that allows you to do this massive pattern matching in a matter of minutes instead of several days.
Yeah.
So IT has arrived, and that's partly why this is starting to be driven so hard, is because now we have the power. I always was interested in artificial intelligence, and way back in the 90s, I took a job with Farmers Insurance. I was an IBM consultant, and they had a product called Tears, which was a platform built for building AI. And we got to the point where we realized we don't have the processing power. There's no way that this is possible today with the kind of computers we have today, not even on the mainframe. The mainframe wasn't powerful enough, and that was the big machine right back then. But now we've arrived. We've arrived to a point where we can do it. We have the technology now to build these massive systems. That's why now the question is the data, how clean the data is, how complete the data is. Because if you're just looking at data from one insurance company, you're not getting a really accurate picture of the general population. You're getting a picture of your demographics. But your demographics may only serve a particular area, so you don't get the broader picture. And somehow we're going to have to solve that problem. I don't know if it's a function of government, and that's a problem because so many people have they're suspicious about government. But somewhere we have to start pulling this kind of data together. And I don't know how it's going to get solved, but it's literally holding us back from what we need to achieve. We could do so much more if we had those big places to store data and have it safe so it didn't have personal information in it at the same time. Might have demographics, but it doesn't have your name and phone number and where you were born. And that tends to be what everybody wants to gather, right? They want all your personal data because we're focused on marketing. We've always wanted, I need their email. I want to be able to reach out to them. Let's do, remarketing on Google so we can get in their face. We haven't thought about it in terms of improving people's quality of lives, health, making legal questions easier. For God's sakes, tell me right now, don't you think that the government should do my taxes?
Yes, they should be able to.
They have the data. Why are they asking me to fill the form out? Just send me the form and I'll look at it and agree or disagree. And if I disagree, I'll go to, my H&R Block guy and let him fix it.
Well, not only that, but how much more complicated can they make it, right? Like it's not like you can learn how to do it because they change it and you can't figure out what those changes are. My daughter is an actor and a director, and she called us last night and she's like, oh my God, how do I do my taxes? I have 6 W-9s and 4 W-2s, and I worked in 3 different states last year. What do I do? And she shouldn't have to pay for a tax professional at 26 to get her taxes done. And
it should just, right now, it should just be mailed to us.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. So I want to shift a little. Kathy, you've spent so much time in so many different spots, and right now you're exposed to so many different industries. Let's talk a little bit about what we see as far as minorities and women in these roles that people are coming to you. Obviously, we all know as women that we're not represented nearly as much as we'd like to be, and people of color as well. What do you see in these small private companies and folks that are coming to you?
So it's interesting. The the statistic that I always come to is that even if you look at the general workforce population, women comprise just under 50%. And we're not even going to get into pay disparities and things like that, because that will set us down a completely different rabbit hole.
Exactly.
But when you think about the technology space, women are less than a third of the overall workforce. And that's at every level in these companies. And it's not surprising, whether it's technology or finance or other industries that have traditionally been more male dominated. At every level of the career progression, you see women drop off. And so candidly, the number of women CEOs that we see is, I think less than a handful at any given time. On the Andra side, we're an incredibly diverse team. So if you look at our team, in addition to myself, the rest of my team, while they are men, they're also they're diverse. There are other people of color. And so it's not lost on me that I joined a team that just looked a little bit different from other firms. And when we work with founders, we are much, I think we're less willing, people have these unconscious or hidden biases, which I think is really interesting. I think we tend to be much more open-minded as to what a tech CEO or a tech C-suite is supposed to look like. If anything, what we're looking for is diversity. We're not necessarily looking for diversity just for, physical appearances, but really diversity of thinking, diversity of experience, because what we want to see is a really well-rounded team. And we aren't as likely, I think, just again, because we are a diverse team, to have preconceived notions around what, management teams are supposed to look like. And I think that's really important. Another interesting fact, for example, on the investing side, we know for a fact that increasingly more investors are looking for diversity, and they're not finding it. But I had it was really great yesterday. I ended up having an initial meeting with an investment team. It's a multifamily office, and on the screen were two other women. And I'm not saying that for me, that's exciting just because it is so rare to see other women investors, other women who are allocating capital. And so I think the more women, though, that we can get into these positions where they are allocating the capital and frankly demanding to see diversity, whether it's a core part of someone's investment strategy or one of the factors that go into our analysis, that's how we're going to be able to push for greater diversity on teams. And so, I think it's just incumbent on all of us to focus on this and keep talking about it. And it's why, frankly, Jody and Tracy, I love the fact that you're doing this series to focus on women, because I think it's important. The more people talk about this and the more people shine a light on this, it's just only going to help everybody else, even if it's indirect, where people start to have different conceptions around what does a women technology entrepreneur look like? What does a woman investor look like?
And that goes all the way back to what we were talking about at the beginning, is so often you hear young women, especially, they see this woman doing something who looks like her. Right. We hear about it most in acting, right? And the Academy Awards that just happened, and you see little girls seeing an Asian woman who got the biggest award there is to get after a massively amazing career Michelle had. And, it's important. It's important for people to see people that look like them doing something that they're excited about. So I think that's amazing that you guys have created a workplace that's diverse to start. And so you you're already well on your path because your minds are so open to the possibilities of what you're doing.
It's totally the case. And, a lot of times these young women, this goes back, Tracy, I think, to your comment around your local community. They often don't see these role models in their day-to-day lives or in their communities. They're not an everyday part of their life. But then when you watch, whether it's the Academy Awards or something else, or you're on the internet and you see, though, that outside of your community, there are lots of butt-kicking women doing really amazing things that you never even thought were conceivable is pretty impressive. And then back to Tracy, your point about parents too. I think it's awesome. Like, I would have loved if my parents had seen, someone like Michelle Yeoh receive an Academy Award, because then for them, they're like, oh, wow, it is possible for someone who looks like my daughter to achieve success in this area. Because when you don't see those role models, you think, oh, those doors are closed off to me. So, it's that whole idea of seeing role models is really important. Otherwise, it's really hard. I mean, I would say this as someone who, when I started out in finance, there were so few women at senior levels. And it just wasn't something that, so for me, I sort of thought, oh, you have to be extraordinarily special. I mean, you still do have to be extraordinarily special, but it was almost so insurmountable that I couldn't relate, if that makes sense. And so it's only as I've gotten older and you've also started to see more women and you've seen more women helping other women that that these sorts of things become more normalized.
Right. There's one thing that's good about the internet, and there's a lot of bad things. But one good thing is kids and diversity, kids that are diverse, kids in underserved communities, girls, they can go on YouTube, they can go on places and outside of their community because they're not seeing it, and find people that can represent them. So it's pretty important. There's a lot of other garbage on the internet that is not helpful to women. And that's again a whole nother episode about all the stereotypes that mess with our heads. But I think it's amazing what you're doing. And do you guys have a mentorship program, or do you do that, any of that kind of thing? And how do you help women that are, come up and coming, overcome some of these stereotypes and feel comfortable? Tracy always says I suffer from imposter syndrome sometimes, because I do. And and it's important for them to, I think so many younger women, I see it in my daughter and both my daughters, they grew up, they're younger. For them, they're just like, we can do whatever we want. And I love that we're raising our girls to be more and more like, not coming and feeling like they're going to hit a wall, right? Because they don't see someone, they're like, well, I can do that. Well, I'll just dive in with both feet. So what are you able to do to help kind of that process?
So at Andra, we're relatively small. We're an 8-person firm, so we don't have a formal mentorship program. That said, it's interesting. I personally still have a number of mentees that I guess I adopted, or maybe they adopted me back when I was in finance. And I also have some incredible mentors, by the way, who I still speak with and get lots of career advice about, and who are amazing sounding boards. And so, people often just contextualize mentorship relationships as something for that particular job or firm. And that's not the case at all. It's important those are lifelong relationships. And ideally over time, they become friendships. And you as a mentee are also able to provide insight and help. And so I'll give you an example. More recently, one of our partners had asked me to mentor a young woman who, of all things, is working at a very interesting industrial lighting company, but is very interested in technology. Her family, she's from Taiwan, had lived in Vancouver and was educated in Vancouver. So I'll tell her about the conference. So part of it is, for me, I'm trying to help her better understand the technology landscape and understand, sort of areas that could be potentially interesting to her. And so we're having that conversation. And I'll give you an example of how a mentee can help a mentor. So I know nothing about search engine optimization. And so we're going through a project, and it turns out that she does a lot of the media and online, sort of presentations and things for the company that she's at. And so I have very happily looped her in. And so we'll integrate her into that process to help us. But, so like I said, it's a two-way street, but we try to do it informally. And I think for me personally, I draw a lot of energy from interacting with people, because especially younger people, because they have such awesome ideas, different perspectives, and frankly, they're seeing so much more. Speaking of like all the their good influences and other not so great influences out there, but they are so much more on top of it than I am. And so, it's a lot of it is just informal, but I think for everybody, these relationships can be so rewarding. And then last but not least, people often think of mentors as, older, more senior person, younger, more junior person. And that's not the case. They're also peer relationships. So, everybody has, whether you call it this or not, a personal board of directors. And so these are my girlfriends. And so
that's awesome.
It's posse of people and they've seen a lot of what you've seen. Maybe they've navigated in a different context, but you have got to have that group. You need to have your own personal board too, to help you out and help you sound out stuff in a safe space where that when you say something, they're not gonna suddenly, that it's not somehow going to be used against you, if that makes sense, or to practice saying, well, if I said it this way, how does that sound? And they can tell you, Kathy, that is a crap idea, so try it again. So things like that. So, I think it's important to think about mentorship in sort of a 360 context versus just, up, down, that kind of thing.
That is the takeaway for today, for sure. Your personal board of directors. That's amazing.
I call the people in my front row.
Yeah. Yep.
People who I feel like are cheering me on, right? They are my mentors, because they're the ones who are going to be most honest, and they're the ones who are going to be giving me the most praise and keep me going. But I have to say, this is a women in technology discussion. I don't find at where I am at my level, I find that the women that I do meet are super competitive, and they're not good at mentoring other women. In fact, they're terrible at it. They're absolutely terrible at it. And sometimes I feel that there's that competitive edge there. They don't want to do it. And it makes me sad, really does. I have some amazing men in my life now who I would consider my mentors, but I haven't found women who are at the higher levels make really good mentors. And then the ones that do, they're so busy.
Yeah.
I have a few of those that I'm working on, and they're amazing mentors, because they have that nurturing capability. If they can let down their competitive edge and just say, this is not about me, this is about this person right now. So I'm hoping that we see more women take those mentorship roles, whether it be within the company, growing younger women to get them up to the higher levels, or it's or more of a community, broader based, where people are reaching out to women who are coming up the ranks. And on our open source community, there's a handful of women that I am working with, and it's my favorite part of my job. It really is. So be a mentor, absolutely.
Yeah, Tracy, that term. Have you heard the term queen bee?
Oh yeah.
Oh yes. Yeah. We don't need any queen bees. We really don't.
It's like diva.
We can't have them, because it holds everybody back. It's at some point in your career, you've already reached a certain level. You don't have to have that competitive edge anymore. And I understand it. You have to have a serious competitive edge to get ahead in a male-dominated field. You do. But there is a balance. Everything has moderation, right? And so somehow women have to figure out that balance. They're so driven. They have to be able to back off and say, now I need to help somebody else drive, right?
Yeah. Well, they have to, because otherwise, I saw this at larger firms, such as at Goldman. The best leaders are the ones that create their own armies. And so it's not necessarily women, but I've seen the very successful men are very smart because they keep pulling up their people. And over time, and they put those people in really important roles. And so over time, you've got your people in all the seats. And so you control the chessboard, if you will. And so I just think it's a shame when people lose sight of the fact that by pulling people up, you're creating more allies, right? Versus someone who's going to, quote, take you down. That's a really toxic mentality. And, I just feel like sometimes, frankly, women and men need to do a better job of calling out when something like that happens. Because I think actually that's even worse, because it to continue the analogy, it sort of destroys the hive, right? And it's actually even more discouraging as a woman. And I've totally seen it, and I totally know what you're talking about. It's even more discouraging because it causes other women to leave or just do,
Absolutely.
because you just think, okay, well, this is not the role model that I'm looking for.
Then you're stuck behind somebody who isn't necessarily looking out for you to raise you up and put you in one of those seats along with them, right? Exactly. They're looking at it from a very, this is an individual battle. This is my battle, rising up through the ranks, and I don't have the strength to carry anybody with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
we have
Kathy,
to figure that one out.
We're getting close to the end of our amazing time together here. And I just want to ask you, what kind of advice do you have for aspiring women and people of color that are young and trying to get into the industry of tech or whatever industry it is that they want to be part of?
I would say two things. I would say network like mad. And this is advice I wish I could give my younger self.
Yeah.
It is using those networks, being thoughtful about it, finding mentors, whether they are other women or not, whether they are other people of color or not, but just finding people that you have something in common with who seem to have an interest in helping you or at least guiding you, because you don't know what you don't know. And then I also think it's incredibly important to take risks as a junior person. And I think if, for example, again, if I hadn't tried for this internship and hadn't tried it out, I would never have been on the career path that I'm on now, for better or for worse. But I think it's been for the better. And so, and especially earlier on, you have much more latitude to try lots of different things and fail, versus later in your career where it's a little bit harder. It's harder, it's more public, there's more at stake because you manage bigger teams, you manage bigger budgets and things like that. And so, again, just thinking about it from the perspective of why I think tech is so interesting and why I love what Andra does, if you don't try, you're never going to know. And again, you also have to kiss a lot of frogs to find your prince. So, or princess, right? So
exactly.
So I think that stuff is important for people.
I would concur. Knowing how to fail is probably one of the most important skills that anybody can have. And knowing that you don't know everything and it's okay not to know all the answers and it's okay to ask, that's important too. And I think that's probably women are afraid to ask. A man and a woman driving in a car and they get lost, the man's going to be the one that's going to stop and ask where they're at. The woman will say, "No, let's figure it out." We got to figure out how to roll down the window and ask what the correct direction. And it's okay to be wrong.
Absolutely.
Right.
Well, thank you so much for being with us. This was just an amazing conversation, and we're so happy that we got to spend some time with you and learn about what you're doing. And it just sounds it's been a crazy time with markets and investing and all that. So it's good to see all the positive that's really going on. Sometimes our news floods us with the negative. So it's important. It's important to Tracy and I to really bring folks like you in and have great conversations about the good stuff. and the positive. Then I'm a cup half full kind of girl. That's how I have to see the world. So it's nice to get together with like-minded folks to do that. So thank you so much for joining us today, Tracy, as always. Love hanging out with you for an hour or so.
And Kathy, it was great meeting you.
It's great to meet you both. And thank you so much. And thank you for doing this program. Truly, I think it's great. And I love, just the name says it all, Techstrong Women. So it's fantastic.
Thank you so much. And hey, thanks for everybody watching today. We're excited to bring you another episode of Techstrong Women. Be sure and tune in to Techstrong TV every day for lots of great interviews and all sorts of great people you can meet and things you can learn. Have a great day.
Hi, everybody. Mike Rothman here, General Manager of Techstrong Research, with another episode of the Techstrong Research Review. It's been a couple of weeks. Mitch and I, we've been rolling everywhere. We were in, Boca for an executive meeting. Mitch, and we'll talk about an analyst conference that he just went to. So first review that we've done in a couple of weeks. Mitch, my partner in crime, Mitch Ashley, how are you? Things are going okay the last couple of weeks?
I'm doing well. I put some new tires on the van crossing the country. I'm pretty soon going to cross the pond. I'm not sure how that'll go in the van, but hitting the road again. So, well, and we've had so many conferences that our video team has been at. So it's really been a logistical, how do you keep everything connected, and that's part of why we haven't gotten together to record a session yet. So it's good to be back doing it with you, Mike.
It is, and I'm humping the Pelican Brewing Company today.
I see that? Okay,
at Oregon,
new advertiser. Okay.
Yeah, the new advertiser on great brew pub on the coast of Oregon, overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It really is fantastic. So if you're in that area, definitely go check out Pelican Brewing Company. But that's neither here nor there, right? It's just more one of my collection of beer shirts that I have pretty much all over the country. But I don't have a problem. I can stop at any moment. So
I'm sure you can. Yeah,
absolutely. So what we're going to talk about today, what's interesting is, and Mitch and I were just chatting a little bit about, kind of what companies have to do to more effectively deliver solutions when we're in, a downturn, right? When there are economic headwinds we're facing. We don't have the funding that we've had. We don't have access to the resources that we've had, in the go-go days, right? It wasn't a matter of, hey, just hire a whole mess of people and we'll raise more money or we'll sell some bonds because, kind of money's pretty much free from that standpoint. Not so much anymore, right? So you were just in New York with Alan at the Coforge analyst conference. So definitely I'm sure a lot of folks don't even know what Coforge is. And it's not really necessarily about them, right? It's really about this idea of how do you start to leverage systems integrators as a way to start really addressing the fact that we can't, kind of deliver a lot of these solutions internally anymore.
Yeah, I think it's that. I think it's also, a lot more kind of fixed price bids. We need to have a higher success rate on completion of our projects. And sometimes that that as a strategy for doing that, or at least some systems integrators will sign up for fixed bid contracts. Of course, then you're managing to the scope very tightly, but you do get some output. Yeah, Alan and I were invited. I think you were busy with some other things to go up to that analyst conference, and I hadn't heard of Coforge before. It's actually through a contact of Alan's that recently went there. It's $1 billion company based out of India. They do most of their work in the UK, their biggest projects, but they do projects all over the world in finance and insurance and transportation. The big three. What stood out to me is, they give the normal pitch they give to analysts, like folks do, and touting their success. Of course, they've had a significant growth. I think it was from about 400 to $1 billion, 400 million in the last, I think, 6 years or so. So it's a relatively short period of time. So something's going on there that's going right. And they tout their industry expertise as one of their differentiators. It's not the old Anderson model of, here's the new group graduation which happened. We got a new group of kids showing up on our project from Anderson, right? I remember those days when I was at EDS. But I think what it signifies too, Mike, is a big emphasis on, we can't do it all ourselves, IT organizations or business units for that matter. Some of these things are big lifts, right? I remember the days of you wanted to be the third manager on the project because the first two got killed after the project got behind and went over budget. So you can't run those same risks anymore. You've got to have a higher probability of success. And maybe bringing in some expertise that you don't have. I mean, there's lots of reasons for using a SI for doing that kind of project work. I know you've had a lot of experience with.
I have, and what's interesting is you have a lot of different options for how you solve the problem, right? There were companies like a Coforge and Wipro and kind of a dozen others that are at that scale that can take on, again, very significant systems, just really enterprise type systems, and really, kind of take that from cradle to grave, hundreds of folks and all sorts of architects and, those are really large scale projects, right? But there are also much more targeted integrators that focus on things like a Salesforce or, Workday or some of the other, big SaaS initiatives that folks have. We're going to start seeing a lot of them that are focusing on AI. We see a lot of them that focus on security architecture and MDR in order to, again, provide both expertise and resources that are really hard to get out there in the field. So it does feel like we're a little bit in, the time machine, whether we want to go back to 1998, whether we want to go back to, 2006, 2007, where we had to start figuring out, is it business process outsourcing? Then that gave way to out-tasking and, do I want the big thing? And then, try to give it to one company to do it, obviously with a huge amount of risk. Do I want to break it up and become the general contractor amongst many different providers? And now that we're all moving towards these SaaS and cloud platforms, you have these specialty companies that are coming up with an expertise in AWS or an expertise in Azure or GCP or any of these different SaaS platforms with not just people that are expert in that group, but technologies, right? Work kits or tool kits that they have that ease and facilitate the the project, right? They've got, kind of design patterns. They've got, code snippets. They've got all sorts of stuff that can help you accelerate, your project on that front. So again, it really is an interesting time in that, do I want to just give it to somebody and have them deal with the whole thing? Or, do I really want to kind of figure out what targeted expertise will help me from the standpoint of this project and then, start to manage that accordingly?
And there's definitely a tier of companies who tend to hire the larger SIs, right? And the relationships are long. I mean, it's kind of once in the door, they're there for a while. And I know the old model, at least when I was in that part of the industry, it was more body shop, right? It was just throwing people at it, right? Because these are all new kids out of college and great talent, but they're learning while
I was one of them too. I worked for E&Y back in the day. So
yeah, exactly. I think most of us started that way back in the day. But they tend to have longer term relationships. So once you're in there, you're helpful. You're now part of the CIOs, the CTOs, the CISO strategy, right? For part of at least how you deliver this. And I think that's built on success, right? So you got to prove yourself. They're interested in, and there's plenty of other people who have to step in and take it on. But I think your point about it's not just the quantities of people they bring, it's the experiences that they can leverage from what they've done with you and other people, and that the fact, are they keeping up on how they can apply technologies? Because the themes I took away from that conference, the COFER conference, was we were looking for more efficient ways to do things. It's not just business process engineering. It's like, I need a measurable difference in how fast we can respond to delivering this service, right? There was a trucking company CIO who was there. I don't know if I got to mention the name, but anyway, he's like, we need to double the revenue, but I don't need to have twice as many shipping terminals, right? Where all the trucks arrive to get their loads of stuff. I need to do the same with what I've got. How do we do that? How do we make that more efficient? That's the kind of challenges I think, at least in one category, people are asking for, right?
Yeah. Well, again, I think that everybody's trying to figure out how to grow revenue without, kind of increasing, their cost base in line with that. We've got to become more efficient. We can't, again, invest ahead of the curve on a number of these things. And I think really the point is we've got to leverage other folks' experience in doing that, right? Sometimes it's through an SI, sometimes through a target service provider, sometimes it's through, as much as I, hate to say it, folks like a Boston Consulting or McKinsey that will come in and again, bring your checkbook. But the reality is, they're going to come at it from a business analysis standpoint that really helps you, understand your business from that standpoint. So again, now it's hard sometimes to, make that decision. Hey, we want to bring somebody in from the outside because it is such a constrained economic environment. But in a lot of cases, you can get a multiple of that investment, especially now, because now's the time to start making those, types of investments, start, funding some of those projects so that when growth, happens, and again, whether it's in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, nobody knows when we hit that inflection point. You as an organization want to be ready, right? The CTO and the CIO of that organization want to be ready. And that's a lot of what, kind of our digital transformation efforts and research really focus on, which is, how do you, kind of make sure that you're asking the right questions, right? How do you make sure that you've got, kind of the right staff and expertise in place so that you can, start driving a lot of these initiatives. And, I don't want to conflate it with, DevOps, right? Oh, digital transformation. That just means we're going to move towards Agile and DevOps. This is much more about, how you're transitioning your business in a digital way, right? How you delivering your value to your customers in a way that is more effective, a way that is more leverageable, a way that is cheaper to deliver for you and easier for your customers to consume. Those are the kind of things that I think are important to really spend some time thinking about now. But alas, a lot of folks are still trying to figure out, I had to cut, kind of 20% of my staff. What the hell do I do now? Right. Yeah. So, you've got a whole bunch of things. And you know what? This is another example where you gotta, be able to chew gum and tap your belly at the same time, because if you can't do both, you'll be flat-footed when we do recover, because you'll be much more efficient, but you won't be positioned for growth at that point.
Well, and that's a good point, because, oftentimes cost cutting is just purely that, but seems to be most often it's we're cutting, but we're also going to reinvest some dollars other ways from what we were doing, right? So let's pivot and take a different approach, or do some things that we haven't been able to do because we just weren't getting to them. I think the other thing that's kind of really changed, Mike, is people are thinking in, even though it's not DevOps and Agile, they're thinking in business strategy in terms of, I need results in 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 3 months, 6 months increments. I don't need it 3 years from now. I don't need a freaking ERP system that's 7 years to implement, right? That they told me would take 3. We can't do that, right? The business is looking for immediate gains, is on a track towards something larger, not just sign me up for the journey, for the project from hell that never ends.
Right. You can't, right? I mean, because the reality is it'll be your successor, maybe even your successor's successor, if it takes multiple years to deliver on these things, which again, I think that the whole agile mindset really fits into that approach as well, because it's not, and again, think about a big ERP thing back in the day, you were implementing SAP on-prem and it was a 2 to 3 year project, that looked an awful lot like waterfall. Right. And now that, kind of we are transcending a lot of that, we can build in and look at a finance tech stack or a MarTech stack or a sales tech stack where we're putting these pieces together, kind of piecemeal. We're doing one thing, we're getting that over the finish line, then we're adding in a module, we're adding in another module. And that's where a lot of these platform players start to come in. Again, your Salesforces, your Workdays, kind of a lot of these that, kind of you build incremental
service now
on top of service. Now, of course, that's a great one. Where you're building, these incremental capabilities on top of the platform, because you do have to reduce your risk relative to, any of these big initiatives. I mean, again, we just don't have time to mess around with it. And nobody has the tolerance, as you just said, Mitch, for, a 3-year implementation plan.
Yeah, that's shivers thinking about that. I wanted to mention too, Mike Vizard, Chief Content Officer with Techstrong, just came back from ServiceNow's user conference. So there's a bunch of videos, great interviews up on. I haven't chance to see all of them, but I've seen a few, and there's some great stuff up there backing up what we're saying, right? So check that out on Techstrong TV. The other trend or thing that I saw occurring, at least in this analyst conference, is a big emphasis on data analytics, and platforms for data, right? How do you get access to all this stuff, and how do you start to use it? Not just in some giant data lake, but how to use it for even AI, which was another big theme, and not have to, even in generative AI, right? There's different models, different LLMs for different kinds of problem solving. Do you have a partner? Do you have somebody who knows that and says, I just need the right data to train in this? I already have a model that is good for your website, another model for how to do, question and answer around troubleshooting or whatever it might be, that I can start to train with your data. Okay, that's a head start. Just knowing that and knowing how to get going with the right tools that may be already pre-built, right?
Yeah, for sure. And again, it's a very interesting time in that we just have to figure out how to be more efficient with a lot of these initiatives. You can't stop innovation, right? If you stop innovation, your business dies. It's as simple as that. Right. So we have to figure out a way, again, using, some help from these different folks, getting, some perspectives on, how other folks in the industry are doing things. All of these are key tactics that we're going to have to use in order to, continue to move forward. Again, knowing that we've got constrained resources for the next, whatever it is, right, 12, 18, 24 months before companies are really going to feel comfortable in hitting the gas and starting to increase their level of investment.
Yep, precisely. An important part of the market. So thanks to the folks who invite us to those kind of things.
You bet. And one other plug, kind of getting back to the point about data, right? God, I wonder if somebody would be having a conference that's focused on data ops sometime soon, maybe August. So that's another thing. It's obviously a very timely topic. It's something that, there is just a ton of interest on, and we will be doing our data ops conference, I believe, in August. So make sure you sign up for that, because there'll be a whole bunch of research relating to how to really leverage data to further, kind of the business objectives of a lot of these digital transformation efforts. So check that out. So Mitch, anything else before we wrap up on this?
August 16th. Just want to plug August 16th. Go to devopsevents.com. You can find out a lot more. And if you're interested in speaking too, I know they're still accepting applications for talks and things like that. So you and I are sure will be doing some stuff there too. There's some really good things happening. So I'm excited about doing that with you.
For sure.
One thing I want to put a plug in for, I don't know if everyone following Techstrong Research also follows the pulse meter activity that we have going on. This is a motion that Mike and I and our team do with different partners. Sometimes it's like AWS and their partner community. Sometimes it's directly with a technology supplier, where we are right now, this moment, taking the pulse, if you will, from our 500 million visitors to across our sites and videos, content, et cetera, on certain topics around whether it's adoption of something or digital transformation of that, or what the barriers are to something. Yeah. And this is data that we're collecting like today, tomorrow, next week. So they're short turnaround kind of things. I think there's some good insights there for folks that are like, okay, we're thinking cloud native. What are the questions I should be asking? Well, looks like the Techstrong Research folks have done some stuff like that. Let me go check that out.
And for each one of the pulse meters, we do provide our perspective on how that impacts you as the audience, as the reader, as the practitioner that has to make sense of all these things. So it's not just, yes, it's in a very clean, graphical infographic type of format, but there is, quick research depth there for how do I apply this data to my problems today. So it is pretty effective. And we do a webinar with each one of these pulse meters. So we kind of dig into the data with, the sponsor and one of the folks from the Techstrong Research team. And again, it's pretty effective. And we have a whole mess of them coming up. So keep an eye on starting in mid-June. So I think next week or the week after, we start with a couple of these, and it'll go through most of the summer. So we've been, just a lot of activity around the pulse meters. You've probably seen the polls that we kind of put up on the website pretty much every day, because we're asking somebody about something. And we've got a number of them, again, kicking off that'll happen throughout the summer and the rest of the year. So lots of activity along those lines. We've got some work that we're doing for the CNAP space in security, and that's really kind of a conglomeration of workload and container and CSPM and a lot of other markets that are coming together. So we've got some research, that we're going to be initiating over the next couple of weeks in that area as well. So a lot going on. All right, lots of struggling.
You can download the free pulse meters at techstrongresearch.com.
You can. They're all within our resource library. So good. Mitchell, great insights. Again, I think from that perspective, everybody has to start thinking about how they can, get some help. And funny, we're going to do a cyber conference in November, and the theme is going to be, help is on the way, right? Because we can't do it all ourselves. And this is a microcosm based on applications. But when we think about security, it really is the same thing as well. So we can't do things all by ourselves. We need some help. So with that, we will wrap up. Unless you had another parting.
I was going to see if we can get the rights to the Beatles song "Help." We'll build that.
I'm pretty sure.
I don't think so.
Music budget may not allow for something like that.
Okay, well, maybe next time.
Well, listen, if you wanted to bust out the guitar, I'm not sure anybody would rat on you.
Just send the royalty checks this way.
Mitchell is actually, pretty good and talented guitar player. So maybe we'll have to come in and do a little guest.
Yeah, you have to come and see if I play.
So with that, we will sign off for this week's Techstrong Research Review. It'll be up soon, and then we will be back in a couple of days with the next one, because we are going to get back into a weekly cycle on this.
Get the rhythm going. All right, thanks everybody. Thanks, Mike.
This is Techstrong TV.
Well, the pleasure of being joined by Andrew Pinkavichis. Am I saying that right, Andrew?
Pinkavichis, that's right, yeah.
Pinkavichis, great. Senior Product Manager, DevOps with Jira Software at Atlassian. Welcome.
Hey, thanks, Mitch. Appreciate it.
Glad to have you join us today. We're going to get into a number of things, but I'd love to have you first introduce yourself. Tell us a little about you and also what your role is at Atlassian.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work at Atlassian. We've been helping teams adopt agile processes in the software world for over 20 years. My role there is the senior product manager and product lead for security in Jira, which is a new capability that we're releasing next week.
Fantastic, exciting. Well, I've been a Jira user myself at a number of different companies and experienced that. And the role Jira has played, and now Atlassian plays in kind of the open DevOps strategy that you have. I'd love to hear you talk about how you approach DevOps and kind of reducing friction and helping flow and keeping people in that cognitive mindset to get work done.
Yeah, absolutely. So inside of Atlassian, what we've realized over 20 years of supporting our customers is that there's so many different tools that developers need to access on a daily basis right now. In our research, we've identified that there's about 25 different tools that the developer might need to navigate in any given week. So that's a lot of context switching, and that takes developers far away from focusing on the flow state that's super critical for them to ship great software and what they want to do every day. So what we've realized is that those tools are probably the best breed ones for those teams to leverage. So we don't want to take them away from them. The best solution is actually to integrate them and make that diverse kind of tool chain feel like an all-inclusive, all-in-one for a customer. So that's really our approach to DevOps when it comes to Atlassian. It's by taking a very open approach to whatever tools customers are using on a daily basis, bring them into Jira, and we'll make sense of that data for you to manage work on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. And those can, anywhere in the development flow, we can kind of thinking of DevSecOps, right? Very early in the creating of code inside the IDE. It can be in infrastructure. Yeah. It can be in dynamic testing in a production or test, running environment. It can be just while we're writing the code. So any of those steps is a place, obviously the earlier the better, is where we can engage and hopefully correct some security issues that we might find as early as possible.
Absolutely. And that whole DevSecOps trend is something that's really emerging and becoming prominent for teams these days to have to manage. Of those 25 tools I just mentioned prior, about 9 of them on average inside of an average enterprise is classed as a security tool, which means that there's a lot of different steps. The developer has to be matching vulnerabilities from lots of different providers as they go from writing a pull request through the deploying code and then managing it at scale. They have to keep on top of it at each step. And that's a lot of cognitive load for a developer to take on.
The analogy that I use is imagine driving a vehicle. In this case, you have 24, 25 different tools or dials or buttons you're supposed to be trying to manage while you keep your eyes on the road. That's what we're trying to do is eliminate those distractions.
That's right. And that comes down to that sense of developer productivity, but more importantly, developer joy. You got to keep them happy whilst they're working on really important features for your customers and keep those distractions away. And that's hopefully what we're really trying to do with security in Jira.
Excellent. So let's talk about security in Jira. I'd love to hear you talk about the announcement.
Yeah, absolutely. So on June 6th, we're expanding the scope of Jira software in cloud to also include a new capability called Security in Jira, which is a security tab that's right there accessible for everyone inside the left pane of Jira. What we're doing is enabling our 100,000 customers to actually manage all of their security vulnerabilities within one place. Rather than, as we mentioned before, doing all that context switching across 9 security tools, you simply plug them into Jira and kind of hit play, really. It makes it really simple for a team to have a full view of every single security vulnerability and triage it as a team.
Interesting. So talk a little bit about then having this security tab. Is this something people have to go check? Is this something that's going to show up as a Jira item that they're following up on? How does that fit into the workflow for a developer and maybe a security team?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've partnered with 5 kind of leading vendors in this space to enable this capability, that being Sneak, Men, JFrog, Laceworks, and Stackhawk. So really covering that full software development lifecycle. And we stream in vulnerabilities from each of these providers directly into Jira. And inside of the Security in Jira tab, you can really simply view each of those vulnerabilities, rank order them from what provider they've come from and their criticality or severity level, and then easily create a JIRA issue and assign it to someone in your team to remediate. What's even more exciting is that we've actually enabled this with our automation for JIRA feature set as well. So the teams don't even need to go into the security in JIRA tab after they've set it up for the first time. They might wish all critical vulnerabilities identified are sent straight into their backlog with an issue set, a due date, and an assignee against it.
Mm-hmm. Good. I'm glad I asked about going into the security tab. You don't want one more thing to check, right? You want that to fall into the flow of, okay, I'm adding this feature, working this bug, here's the security issue that's come up, and just deal with it naturally as part of the flow. Whether it comes from one or you may have multiple security items that come from the tools, because some of them, a Sneak fits into the IDE and a StackHawk is doing dynamic testing and API testing and men plugging into Bitbucket. So they all kind of have their place in the ecosystem of creating software.
Absolutely. And what's more about that is that we're aware that sometimes multiple vulnerabilities across different providers might be resolved through one process of remediation. So you can actually link multiple vulnerabilities to a single issue inside of security in JIRA and assign that to a team member, which downstream would resolve a number of vulnerabilities from different providers.
Mm-hmm. Very good. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the integration with these 5 technology security companies. Are there a set of APIs that they use to this or to do this? Are they open? Are others can access those things? How does this work?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we're open by default, really in line with our idea of having an open DevOps tool chain here. We've started with 5 of the leading providers in market, but our APIs are available and ready online right now with Atlassiandeveloper.com for any security providers to come in and start integrating into the security in JIRA solution.
Very good. JFrog, Artifactory, that and Atlassian were that and Jenkins were the 3 first tools that I used for my DevOps implementation. So I'm having some flashbacks here. All good memories too, by the way.
Yeah, that's right. That has definitely expanded out in the recent years with so many more providers coming in, and across our 2,500 different marketplace integrations, there's lots of different providers you can connect up to JIRA these days.
That's amazing. That's quite an ecosystem with that many partners and solutions that can be integrated with Atlassian.
Absolutely.
Talk a little bit about it isn't all. Is this just as simple as things show up and just go fix them? There is some filtering and kind of triage and really looking at security vulnerabilities. Sometimes it's around the severity and the priority of the vulnerability. It may also be, we want to address these things earlier than other issues because we're concentrating on that part of the code. So there's more than just things popping up in front of a developer to go fix and work on. There's also kind of managing that workload and making sure you're working on the things that matter most for that point in time.
Yeah, absolutely. There's essentially kind of 3 paths to security in JIRA that hit that space you've mentioned. So number 1 is actually alignment of security vulnerabilities and their risk against your product for not just developers to know about, but the entire product team. In so many of these cases, security tools are classed as developer tools. So product managers, business analysts on teams, maybe release managers don't have insight into the risk that exists inside of their products. So security in JIRA brings those vulnerabilities into a security tab where they can all be listed out, filtered against severity really easily. And now we're bringing more than just a developer to review and action a vulnerability kind of in secret. It becomes part of the core kind of sprint planning process as well. We really see teams potentially sitting around security in JIRA as part of their sprint planning and selecting which vulnerabilities they want to start to action today.
Well, these vulnerabilities can appear more than just in what the code developers are creating, right? You may be upgrading to a new version of an open source package that you're using. And so they can be introduced from multiple sources, not just from your own developers.
Absolutely, yeah. And this kind of comes into that second point there is like there's open source risks, there's infrastructure risks, there's runtime risks. And this is why we've taken an approach of not only being open, but having 5 partners to launch the capability with on the 6th of June, because we want to make sure that we cover that full software development lifecycle from day one.
Well, and I think that's something important to highlight because, Amend with doing kind of SaaS testing, and I believe it's Stackhawk that's doing more DAS dynamic testing integrating into the into Bitbucket and into the IDE. So you haven't just picked 5 people at random. It seems pretty logical that infrastructure, application code, there are multiple places in the life cycle and kind of software stack that these 5 hit pretty well, I think.
Absolutely. And this is where that filtering and then being able to manage different views of all of the security vulnerabilities that are funneling into Jira is that across 5 tools, if you're integrated into, let's say, even 3 or 4 of them, you're going to have a lot of vulnerabilities streaming through into your system. And in addition to that, you're going to want to rank order which ones are low that we can take a slower time to resolve versus the high and critical ones that we need to action today. So we kind of really have over-indexed in regards to providing deep filtering there for teams to very easily work out, right, what actually is top of mind for us across IAC or SAST or SCA, for example. And once those issues are linked into security in Jira, we also visualize the state of that issue as well. So now you've got your vulnerabilities, and you can also see what Jira issues being linked to it and what the state and who the assignee is to that. So you have basically your dashboard transforms in from a set of vulnerabilities all going red into a bit of a mission control dashboard for you to have clarity over who's resolving it and how quickly it's being done.
Mm-hmm. Great. So is security in Jira, is this a new feature people have to buy and pay for? Is it something that comes with your Jira Software Cloud account? How does that work?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it is a free capability inside of Jira software. And all you need to do is be a user of one of those 5 providers in order for the 2 to link up and your team to start being able to leverage that capability. If you're new to security, and this is something that seems interesting to your team to explore and you want to be more aware of your risk posture, we've made it really easy to onboard into one of those security tools as well. So inside of the Security in Jira tab, you'll start to see that appear within your instance, and you can select one of our 5 vendors and very easily within two clicks install it into your environment. And then you can onboard into becoming one of the users of, let's say, Sneak, Mend, or Stackhawk.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like if you're an existing user, maybe 2 or 3 or multiple of those tools, it's an easy way to bring those together, even if you aren't using Jira yet. Sign up for a free account, right? Check it out. Integrate with those tools, correct? Yeah,
absolutely. And look, we've really tried to work out that sense that integrations are hard. For so many cases, teams previous to security in Jira had to write custom code to link up all of their security tools and then create kind of pseudo workflows outside of Jira to even get them into their Jira environment. So we've tried to remove all of that clutter for teams to manage and just make it a really simple plug and play operation so you can get onboarded really quickly and start managing your security vulnerabilities and get more of that visibility into your risk.
Something I'd love to hear more about too is one of the fundamental things about DevOps is it's a lot of it is about automation, right? Because you're doing so many tasks repetitively. You're doing them at high velocity too, right? You can't do them manually. Say some more about some of the automation capabilities of Jira.
Our extensive automations engine enables teams to really easily keep tickets up to date on a daily basis without needing kind of team members or kind of human intervention there. We know that it's hard for teams to jump into Jira and update issue statuses as they do a deployment, conduct a pull request, or any of those kind of actions. So through automations, once that takes place inside of the developer tool, we reflect that change straight away inside of Jira. So you no longer have to, we take out that busy work of having to keep tickets up to date always.
Okay, very good. Very good. I would imagine you're probably not stopping at 5. There might be some more down the road for other security vendors that might be interested in participating.
Yeah, absolutely. We're continuing to invest in security in Jira, and we really welcome additional vendors to review our open APIs and get in touch with us if this is something that seems right for their team, for their company to integrate into.
Okay, very good. I notice you have really nice blog posts, videos, some diagrams, and kind of animation that shows what it looks like inside Jira. So we'll put a link to that blog post in the description for folks that are watching the video, and you go check it out there. I'm sure DevOps.com will be covering some of the announcement as well. So there'll be lots of good things to read about it. Great. Anything, Andrew, that we didn't cover you wanted to touch on?
I think we've covered everything there. I think what I would end on is that if you're an active Jira software user, you'll start to see the Security in Jira tab appear inside of your project from the 6th of June onwards. And I really endorse you to give it a shot and explore.
Okay, very good. Andrew Pikavicius, thank you very much, Senior Product Manager, DevOps with Jira Software at Atlassian. Hope you come back soon, and we'll hear about other great things that are happening there.
Really appreciate it. Thank you, Mitch, for the time.
You bet. Thanks, Andrew.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
This is Techstrong TV.
Joining me now is Boris Gamazechikov, the head of emissions reduction program at Salesforce, with a diverse background spanning the Pentagon's Sustainable Construction Program to implementing corporate and real estate decarbonization strategies. Boris is now driving Salesforce's mission to slash carbon emissions across its entire value chain. Boris, thank you so much for joining us.
Really excited to be here.
That's great. Well, I'd like to start with our first question to kind of take a deep dive into the green code concept. If you could explain what it is, what's the story behind it, and a little bit more about what you do at Salesforce.
Yeah, definitely. So at Salesforce, sustainability is one of our core values. It's really one of the key driving forces of our company. And we're also, of course, a software company. So green code really sits at the intersection of both of those focus areas. We realize that the climate crisis is upon us, and we have less than 8 years by the end of the decade to cut the world's carbon emissions in half. So Salesforce is committed to bringing its entire power to doing that. And so we look at things like decarbonizing our own emissions, first and foremost, as well as bringing our customers along on the journey. We bring our customers to the journey with, Net Zero Cloud. That's one of our software packages that is available to help others on this journey. And so my work specifically is focused on looking at our emissions. And when we break down our emissions, that's scopes 1, 2, and 3. So that's our full value chain. Our cloud software usage, which is all related to our code, is responsible for about 52% of our emissions. So this initiative was really critical and key in highlighting the need for the industry to come together to really partner between the software vendors, the cloud providers, and the customers that are using the software to work together and really find ways to reduce these emissions. And so we're really excited to have brought forth a first stab at this, a collection of best practices that folks using Salesforce technology and beyond can use to start reducing these emissions.
Can you tell us more about these best practices and a little bit more about green code and how it functions?
Yeah, definitely. So the concept is, as you said, the information and communication technology sector is responsible for almost 4% of global carbon emissions. When we look downstream of that value chain, that's really the electricity that's powering the servers and the giant, data center farms. But we think there's so much opportunity further upstream. What we mean by that is actually looking at the code that makes up the software applications that are requiring all these data centers. So when we say green code, we're talking about opportunities across the software development lifecycle to reduce emissions. So from the software architecture, for example, the types of APIs you're using, there's ways that those can be resource intensive or can be more efficient, all the way to developing your actual software. So there's ways to write code that similarly are efficient, more or less efficient. It's like if you're driving a car from point A to point B, there's a lot of different ways to get there. What's the way to get there that it takes less gas, so to speak? Moving on, even from kind of the early stage design and user interface development side of things, there's things you can do like making sure your media is right size, not oversized unnecessarily, and spinning those servers unnecessarily, and all the way on to your operations management. How are you operating and deploying your software? Can it be deployed to cleaner cloud regions? Can it be deployed at times of day when the sun is shining and renewable energy is more plentiful? So really, we're looking at opportunities across the full software development lifecycle. And to really just highlight, this isn't an exhaustive list, but to just highlight that technologists, the folks sitting behind the keyboard, have a big role to play in reducing carbon emissions.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's, in your opinion, it's the entire life cycle as for software development is really affected by using green code. Have you seen this with your own experience working at Salesforce?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as a quick example from early design, one of the things you're doing is getting the requirements and kind of setting the framework around what you're actually going to be producing. And there's a way to approach even that with sustainability in mind. Things like setting some of the default standards in your whatever software you're creating to be the most sustainable option. We've actually seen this, an interesting example with cafes. Some cafes are moving to make oat milk the default option, and you actually have to opt into a less sustainable option. So doing things like that with software, just as a design consideration, is really key. And then, of course, moving on to how you're using code, how you're using APIs, and then how and when and why you're deploying and managing the software.
That's interesting, and I also did not know that about oat milk. So that's a useful tip too when you're getting coffee. Every new initiative, of course, faces challenges. So, what are some of the obstacles that companies might encounter when adopting green code, and what strategies can they use to overcome them?
Yeah, for sure. This is a very new concept in a very fast-moving space. We actually did some research. We put out a survey to really get a sense of the landscape and put some numbers to it. So we found that 75% of folks working in this space are interested in using software to reduce their emissions, but nearly half don't know how, and more than 60% don't include sustainability, skills training in their development programs. So it's definitely an area that's quite early. And so I think just getting the necessary skills, getting the right training will be one of the challenges. We've also seen a bit of a gap between the folks, so to speak, on the ground working on these projects, coding, and leadership in various companies. From the survey, we definitely saw a discrepancy between the interest and the need for this kind of at those levels. But what's great is we've seen a coalescence of various organizations, like the Green Software Foundation is one that has a lot of really great open source tools, learnings. They even have a green software practitioners course that's totally free. So we're really starting to expand with the options here for folks.
That sounds great. Given Salesforce's own commitment to reducing emissions, how does Green Code align with and support your own internal targets?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've achieved net zero residual emissions, but at the same time, we have a goal to reduce our emissions that we can't match with carbon credits, to reduce those emissions by 50% by 2030. And so, as I mentioned before, our cloud infrastructure is more than half of our total emissions currently. And the company is expected to grow. So if we're going to cut those in half, that a lot of that is going to have to come from this kind of cloud infrastructure chunk, which ultimately all comes from code one way or another. And so we found that working on code efficiency is a really it's an untapped leverage point, because we've been doing great work, and others as well, on things like our hardware efficiency, greener data centers, putting more renewable energy on the grid to power those data centers. And we'll continue to do that work, but that's a bit further downstream. If we can go upstream and impact the code, impact the software before it ever spins up those servers, there's a big opportunity for emissions reduction.
And since you've been really focused on this green code, what have you found so far, and how have you been able to track and measure it in terms of, where this is really making a difference?
Yeah, for sure. So, a lot of companies have this notion called cost to serve. A lot of software companies, what is the cost to actually serve to our customers, these services, this software? So that's a key metric that's tracked. A few years ago, we decided to emulate that and create a carbon to serve metric side by side with this key cost metric, also understanding the carbon efficiency of our product. And so since establishing that metric 3 years ago, we established the metric as well as a goal to reduce it 10% annually. And since then, we've exceeded that goal and have reduced it by 26%. So we are looking at the carbon efficiency of our software, and kind of tracking it. And so far we're hitting our goals, and we expect to continue to do so with this great innovation.
For those who are watching on Techstrong TV, they may be excited about hearing about this green code. What would you recommend is the best way for them to start incorporating practices like these into their own software development processes?
Yeah, definitely. I would take a look at the guide as one set of collections of best practices. But there's a lot of others out there. AWS has a collection of they put out a well-architected guide that's much more geared to architects, but they have a sustainability pillar within that. That's a really good resource. And then, as I mentioned, the Green Software Foundation has a lot of resources. They have a collection of what they call awesome green software examples with the GitHub links that you can really dig into, see how folks have done it, and hopefully emulate it yourself.
That's a good point. We're going to have the Green Software Foundation on Techstrong TV very soon for that reason. So thank you for those resources. Boris Gamazaichikov, the head of Emissions Reduction Program at Salesforce. It was a pleasure speaking with you, Boris.
You as well. Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, stay with us on Techstrong TV. We're going to have a lot more on sustainability and tech coming up after this.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with AJ Kulkarni, and he's the CEO for Timescale, and we're talking about how databases are going to be reinvented in the age of the cloud because, well, things are changing. AJ, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We have had time series databases, Postgres databases, all kinds of stuff in and around the cloud. We can all go back to relational databases, but explain to us, if you would, as we enter this new era and there's data everywhere in the cloud, what exactly do we need from a database these days?
It is so fascinating. When we started this company, we thought we were just focused on IoT data, and then time series data, and then over time we found people using us in more and more ways that we didn't expect. And in particular, what we found is that there's just been like a whole new set of sources of data that like didn't exist before. Uh, Obviously, sensors are an example of that. You think about like you're like a Tesla or a Lucid, which is one of our customers, or you think of industrial manufacturing, the sensors people have deployed, or transportation logistics, sensor data. That's one whole category. But we have another of our customers who's in the was one of the largest music labels in the US and well in the world. And we're like, why do we have an IoT customer over here than a music label over here? Like that seems weird. And then realized it was the same trend that in this world there were also new sources of data coming online. And for the music industry, it was I think a classic form of digital transformation that as like music consumption moved from offline to online, from tapes and CDs to SoundCloud, Spotify, you got all these new signals of what people were listening to in real time. Where maybe back in the day, like Billboard would compile like a weekly list of what's trending by calling radio stations. But now, companies can do this in real time by just reading feeds of SoundCloud and Spotify events, which is what this customer does. So I think what we've seen is that like on the on one side you have all these whole new sources of data that are coming online, and the other side, as compute keeps getting cheaper, storage keeps getting cheaper, compute also gets more powerful, and you put all these things together and you give them to developers, right? And the developers say, "Oh, I can build a lot with this. Let me build." And so what we're finding is that in this modern world, people often talk about software eating the world. We like to talk about data is eating software. That more and more applications are not like your CRUD applications of the past, like create, read, update, delete, but these modern, probably more data intensive applications that are collecting these really like high volume new sources of data and making sense of them to provide and deliver really innovative and new customer experiences. So I think the role of database in the cloud is that like also all companies are becoming software companies, or they're getting replaced by software companies. You see this in the car industry, like I just mentioned. Like you have Tesla and Lucid, but on the other hand, you have other folks like GM and Ford trying to become more software oriented, and anyone who's not doing that is going to get replaced by one of those first two. So every company is becoming a software company. Software is powered. A great software is powered by great databases, and in particular, these applications that developers are building are not the simple applications of the past. They're really data intensive. And so the role of a database has only increased, and it's increased not just like in terms of like the number of companies, but also like per company, the use of the database has also increased. So it's kind of this geometric expansion of the role of databases. And I think that's one thing that makes us really excited here at Timescale.
Can we get to a single database architecture of some type? Because we have seen relational and columnar and time series and document databases, and it seems like everybody's kind of struggling with how to manage all of those different flavors of a database. So is that going to somehow consolidate as we go along?
It's a good question. I feel like that's the question we've all been asking for the past decade plus. I think the reality is that as you move to the cloud, it doesn't really matter. Because I think in the cloud, like especially what we're finding with new cloud architectures. So what used to happen in the past is people would say, "Oh, like I need a best-in-class database. So if time series data, I need timescale. If I have geospatial data, maybe I use PostGIS and Postgres. Relational data, I use Postgres." But what we're finding is that in the cloud, people just say, "Hey, like here's my data, and like help me like build an application on top of it." So the model that we personally are moving towards in timescale is, "Hey, like yeah, we can handle your time series data, we can handle geospatial data, we can handle your relational data, we can handle workloads that require really heavy compute, require workloads that require a little compute but a lot of storage." But the key thing is like we will handle it for you. So to answer your question, I think we'll see not a consolidation, but we'll see this question kind of go away as more and more workloads move to the cloud. And if I can add one more thing to that, Michael, I actually one thing we strongly believe at Timescale is that Postgres is actually an incredible versatile foundation, and Postgres can handle relational time series, geospatial, document, JSON, the whole thing. Vector databases now is a new hot thing. Postgres can handle it. But you do have to make some tweaks behind the scenes. But yeah, so I think the cloud it kind of changes the equation in a really exciting way.
As we go along and we have so much data, you hear people talking about cardinality, which seems to be, a very long word to describe the fact that there's just a lot of data that we're trying to correlate and trying to get some sense of the insights that we can surface. But the question then becomes, are we reaching some point where we're having a bottleneck of some type because there is too much data? I mean, what is the ability of the current database architectures to scale up into the range of what seems to be becoming petabytes of unstructured and structured data?
Yeah, I mean, cardinality is typically defined as how many unique things can you track? If are you tracking like 1,000 devices, or are you tracking like 1 million users? We've never had a problem with cardinality. I think other database companies have because of the way they've architected. It's never been an issue for us. So I don't think cardinality is the bottleneck, but there is a bottleneck, and I think the bottleneck is really like as these data volumes increase, and you ask these complex questions of data, the database needs to be able to handle those types of queries. So put another way, I think compute is, I forget the latest graphs, but Moore's law is essentially slowing down, right? And computers only getting so fast, and GPU is useful for some use cases, but not all. But I think the trick then becomes, if you really want to unlock, faster performance, and faster performance really means just a better customer experience. It means screens that load instantly as opposed to, the customer having to wait. I think the bottleneck becomes, how can you architect the system so that you're thinking smarter? And that's actually one thing we're trying to do as we rethink the database in the cloud.
Well, give us some insights as to what that means. I mean, is it a different schema? Is it a different set of engines? What's going on?
Yeah, there are a lot of things. I think one question we've been asking ourselves is, when someone provisions a database, they often think about, hey, how much storage do I need? How much compute do I need? Now, obviously, that's a friction point. That's a headache that creates some risk of like, oh, hey, did I provision enough? And there's been the rise of serverless to kind of get around. But serverless has its own set of problems where it's really expensive. What we found and what we're starting to launch in the next few months is something that essentially gives you kind of true consumption. So the ability to actually not think about how much storage you're provisioning, how much compute you're provisioning, how much memory you're provisioning, and let the system kind of automatically handle it for you, and then you only get billed for what you use. The advantage of this is that as a developer, then you never have to think about like, hey, did I provision enough? Or hey, am I spending too much money? Because you only get billed for what you use. And this might seem, I don't know, this might seem like it's a really interesting change, because on one hand, it really eliminates a lot of the mental gymnastics around trying to figure out the right provisioning so you have enough but you're not overpaying. But it also leads to like cost savings where you can save 20-50% of your cloud spend with a database that's architected the right way. When I say like it's architected in the cloud, I mean there's some things we're doing in our cloud offering, which is now called Timescale, that would be a lot harder to do if you're trying to ship software. And I think by kind of deciding, hey, there are going to be some features that we ship via software and some features we just deliver via the cloud, I think it's unlocked kind of new exciting innovations like those.
If that's the case, then do we need to essentially go into our developers and change their cultural way of thinking because they're so used to over provisioning infrastructure because of all the issues you just described, can we get to a new way of thinking about how we use infrastructure?
It is a new way of thinking, but I actually find it's incredibly liberating. Databases are interesting where, like, yeah, some developers really nerd out on them like we do, but most developers don't want to think about their database. They just want something that works, where they can write data, read data, analyze data, that's, easy, fast, scalable, cost effective, and worry free. And if the developer has to think about their database, usually means something is wrong, like something in that model is not working. And we often talk about like databases are kind of like your Wi-Fi. Like if you and I are worried about our Wi-Fi right now, then that means something's wrong. Like we just want it to work. No, databases are different than Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is homogeneous. Databases are highly heterogeneous. And so one thing we found as we've been kind of rolling this out with some of our, beta users is that yes, it's kind of like you don't have to think about this anymore. But then it's like, oh wait, I don't have to think about this anymore. Like that's pretty actually liberating. And some people are like, I don't believe you. Like, how does this work? And we kind of share, some information with them and we let them test it. But I actually don't think this is it's not a shift in thinking. It's kind of like hey, this thing you thought you had to worry about, you don't have to worry about.
What happens to the role of the DBA in this world then?
Yeah, I mean, I think the role of DBA has always been, I think it's been changing ever since, the cloud first came about, I don't know, 20 years ago. I think there is still a role for people who, are maybe database engineers or data engineers or kind of managing the infrastructure, but I think the role is shifting. And I think it's, not every company can afford a DBA. Not every developer gets enough time with their DBA. And so the way we view this is we're kind of, enabling the average developer to do more of their application. But the reality is that, if you're a DBA, I think the industry is evolving, your role's evolving, and, I think it's incumbent on you to evolve with that.
So as we come together and we all say, data is the new oil, but it seems to me that part of the problem with that whole thing is we don't really have any refineries that can handle all the different types of that oil. So, are we looking at the wrong problem these days and we're not focused enough on how to process the data more efficiently in a way that will realize all these dreams that we have about digital transformation and fact-driven decision making?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's too much emphasis on the specific technologies and the trade-offs, and I think the key is like, hey, what is the customer experience you're trying to deliver? And in some cases, the challenge isn't at the infrastructure level, it's at the application level. And there are often people who come to me, and they say, hey, should I use timescale? And I say, hey, well, are you happy with your current database? Because if you are, don't break what's not broken, don't fix what's not broken. But I do think I think as an industry, like it's often hard to really have empathy for the developer because we just love the work we're doing around databases and data infrastructure. And the thing I really have to emphasize with our team is like our average customer doesn't care, they want this to just work. And the way we nerd out on these things, they will not nerd out. But it's our job to nerd out on these things so they don't have to worry about it. So I do think it's shifting. I think with the cloud, I think it allows us to take on more of the, job to be done, so to speak, for the developer. Yeah, but I think it is shifting. But I think it's shifting in a healthy way. I think at the end of the day, like it's all about the impact we're having and, and hey, like what are we powering? We're powering a customer experience that works, or is this a science experiment? Because it's a science experiment, who cares?
From an ROI perspective, are we now approaching a point where because I'm not over provisioning that my cloud bills may be more acceptable because I'm processing more data per se and I'm getting more value out of that investment?
Yeah, I mean, I think the graph kind of looks like this, like it's like we think or maybe like this, we think the cloud has this ability to really unlock a lot of efficiencies that I think we're going to deliver on the next few months that I think most people are not delivering on. But I think over time, like more companies are going to spend more and more of their budget on software, which will mean on their database. So I think we can do better than we are today, but I think over time you're going to spend more money, but you're going to spend more money to make more money, to build a better business. So yeah, so I think to answer your question, you can have a much better ROI than we have today. And I think what that'll mean is that, as software eats the world, data eats software, that it'll enable companies to get more with their existing budgets and be happy with the growth of those budgets as they serve their customers.
Do you think that also has implications for sustainability because I am processing data more efficiently and that has carbon emission implications?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Uh, to be honest, I personally have not fully thought through the energy footprint because the cloud isn't really a cloud. It's like physical data centers, right? And I think that point is painfully obvious when we ask Amazon to, you know, provide X number of new VMs and they can't, in a given region. Like, oh, it's actually not elastic. These are actual physical things. Um, you know, I don't know. I mean, I suspect, and this is totally an amateur layperson's perspective, I suspect that there are some really smart people thinking about, hey, how do we make these data centers more green, by, better leveraging renewable energy, having them located closer to renewable energy sources like wind and hydropower. Uh, but I'll be honest, this is a little bit above my pay grade, and this is not what I spend my time thinking about. But I'm glad people are thinking about this.
All right, folks. Well, no matter how much things change, they tend to stay the same on one thing. It all starts with the data, and then you work your way up from there. AJ, thanks for being on the show.
Michael, pleasure. Thank you.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Kathan Daraman, who is CEO for Selector.ai, and we're talking about how AI ops is going to be applied to operational intelligence. The world is changing as we know it. Kathan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
There are a lot of folks talking about AI ops over the years, and some have been more successful than others. And of course, we've been doing various forms of operational intelligence with any number of analytics platforms. How is this whole space evolving from your perspective? How are things changing at the moment?
Thanks, Mike. Yeah. So what is Selector? I'll just do a brief introduction. We provide observability and AI ops solutions for our customers and focused on mission critical networks and application infrastructure. Right. The team here is from Juniper, Cisco, VMware, and Nutanix, and we've built products that run some of the largest networks and application infrastructure in the world. So what we are doing here is bringing ML, machine learning, analytics into the operational world for networks and applications. So why is this required? Very briefly, there's been massive architectural changes in how infrastructure is built and delivered and what it is used for, right? The business transformation, right? Applications are no longer monolithic, delivered in a single data center. They are definitely, stating the obvious, a lot of movement to the cloud as well as edge. Enterprises are taking a hybrid approach. All of this, of course, is in the interest of optimization, but it also creates big churn and new complexity, right? So new solutions for observability are required to tackle this complexity and change in how infrastructure is supporting business requirements.
We've been saying for years that the network is the one source of truth in the IT environment, but we always seem to have a hard time getting visibility into not just the network, but what's happening in the stack of software above it. So how did you guys approach that issue?
It's a good point. if you look at networks, even from 5 years ago, it was primarily about connectivity, right? It was like, it evolved into secure connectivity, but hey, how do I get from A to B? And, the SLAs were based on that. That's no longer the case. Whenever I'm building networks or I'm selling network services, how my applications are performing, my user experience has become, more important than just connectivity, from A to B. And that basically means that, networks have to be automated, and observability has to combine both underlying network infrastructure, application, and user experience. So these are inherently very different domains that, existing tools were not looking at, holistically, right? And of course, the data and the volume that you need to look at is also increasing. So this is where the promise of, applying machine learning, but still having that context. You can't just bring in machine learning that a Google or a Facebook has used to recognize our photos, or recognize cat and dog pictures into networking. You need to have domain context. How do you tie underlying infrastructure to applications? And then ML is just another one of the tools that can enable these various domains to coexist, right? And in the end, of course, to deliver these sort of services, you need to have automation, but you can't automate what you can't see, right? So we approach this, in a very layered manner. Right? You start with understanding the network. How do you automate visibility, from the network in various aspects? If you look at a network itself, there is data center, there is WAN, there is SD-WAN, there is network applications, and then how do you tie that to the application layer? It requires working closely with our customers to understand their business processes and their business workflows, so that those tie-ins can be made, right? It's not going to be something that is automatic and comes out of the box, right? You have to work with subject matter experts and practitioners to understand the tie-ins between the two, right? And then the ML is finally, it's an automation tool, right? So once you understand the various workflows and the connections, ML basically automates, rather than a human tying the dots together.
Today, it seems like we have a lot of AI ops platforms, but maybe they're optimized for particular silos. So do we need to kind of A, converge that, and then B, is this a step towards, today, if I look around the world, there's NetOps and IT ops and DevOps, and everybody's got an ops for something. Is all that going to come back together in some cohesive way?
Great point. Actually, first, your earlier point on, yes, everybody is adding, some ML capabilities to their tool, right? So that's why if you look at it, if you are an infrastructure vendor, you have to have AI ops, in your, moniker, so to speak, right? But the key, what end practitioners, operations teams need is, I cannot have an AI ops from vendor one, another AI ops from vendor two, because you're just basically now back to dealing with multiple vendors, multiple domains, right? I might have, as I mentioned before, multiple aspects of infrastructure, each with its own AI ops that each of those individual tools are bringing. I might have a Wi-Fi vendor. Yes, I have AI ops, but is the problem really in Wi-Fi? Yeah, then maybe the AI ops there, could help to troubleshoot Wi-Fi. But what is my problem is somewhere else. My DNS is broken, right? So who is going to bring these various domains together, right? So that is what, a solution that, we are bringing in helps, right? Is your problem, in L1 layer of the stack, or is it basic? Did somebody make a configuration change, right? You brought in, DevOps, right? CI/CD, constant application changes are happening because developers are encouraged to push changes on an ongoing basis. CI/CD promise, like, okay, hey, I make a change, I tested using a CI/CD pipeline, and I push it out to production. It might break something. How do you now know that, okay, there is no problem in the underlying infrastructure, but this change that somebody made is the reason that my applications are failing. Bringing that in, to the overall observability stack, right? Those are the use cases that Selector is focused on. Is we are agnostic to the data and the domains. Right? The more data, the better the overall solution is. How do you then tie them together, right? How do you do the correlation and also build the intelligence before the correlation can happen, right? And that data can be anywhere. And because for operations teams dealing with issues, the data really comes from anywhere. So they cannot say, this is a tool that I don't know about, so I'm going to ignore it. Who's going to fix the problem, right? So that's the true premise for what I call multi-domain AI ops, right? So there are single vendor, single domain AI ops, great. That is needed. They might be able to give us better intelligence for their specific device or domain, but who is going to stitch it all together? And that's basically where a solution like Selector AI comes in.
It also seems that the systems themselves are getting smarter in this regard. Originally, we gave people an analytics tool and a query tool, and we told them it was an observability platform, and they could query that thing to go find out, whatever the root cause of an issue might have been. The challenge is that nobody knew what question to ask. So, are we getting better where the algorithms are going to just tell us what the issues are, and we don't necessarily need to know what questions to ask as much as we used to?
Definitely. I think this is where, the promise of, generative AI or, large language models, start to come in. But, it's, you get what you feed it, right? If you feed just random data to it, it's going to provide random feedback to you, right? So if you look at where large language models are evolving, there is this notion of a context layer that that is needed. Every enterprise, you have raw data, but the LLMs should deal with that context layer, which is basically to provide semantic understanding of what the underlying data and business processes is, and then applying LLMs on top of that can holds the promise of, hey, I can ask questions as we would to each other, rather than, okay, I need CLI from vendor X, CLI from vendor Y, right? And I have all of these tribal knowledge that I need to apply. That context layer is built from the intelligence that the underlying data is providing, right? Somebody might ask, okay, hey, do I have a problem with my SD-WAN circuit for my application X, right? Automatically, LLM is not going to understand that, because there's a lot of domain sense or business context that needs to be built. That layer in between and is crucial, which then means that users can interact, right? And typically interacting with a particular device or a particular vendor, that is okay. But when you have 25, 30 different vendors, and look at the amount of change that is happening in the infrastructure. I'm no longer dealing with just Cisco or Juniper or Microsoft, right? I now have cloud. I might be going through a cloud connectivity provider. How do I suddenly start to bring all of that in? And do I ask questions of each other or specific questions of each of those parts of the infrastructure, each with its own context, right? No, somebody has to normalize it so that I can ask questions like, hey, is my external partner down, and why are they down, right? So that could be where I'm going through a Wi-Fi network to an SD-WAN network to a cloud connectivity all the way up to a SaaS, and then I might have cloud networking or infrastructure to deal with. How do you build that context layer end to end, right? So that's when these things will become truly useful.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like we're going to have to build a lot of large language models that have domain expertise in a particular area, and we just can't rely on a general purpose AI engine that was built for data scraped from everywhere and ended on a certain date.
Yeah, it's a great starting point, but very quickly users will see frustration, because it's going to provide generic answers, right? And I like to joke, I mean, without a lot of parameter tuning, and prompt tuning, what LLMs or ChatGPT like tools will return is, what a CIO a CEO might say in an earnings conference call, right? It's so generic, right? They're saying a lot of words, but it's sort of very generic, right? Whereas what operations teams and operators need is very specific outputs that allows them to solve the problems that they have in front of them, right? So that does require a lot of context building.
Do you think as we go along that maybe we're going to have to reorganize the way IT teams are structured? Because it seems like we've allowed a lot of silos to be built up over the years, and maybe it's time to kind of rethink that. I'm not suggesting that various specialties might go away, but the way we think about how folks invoke various capabilities might be more accessible, because networking is going to get a little easier to deal with.
I think I'm not an expert on that. I'll admit, I'm always been on the product side of the house, right? I am not, I'm not convinced that will happen, because each of the domains are getting more complex, right? You do need to have expertise. That it's nothing is getting simpler, right? To where, okay, hey, I can have one common layer on top, but providing tools that make it easy. Right. The starting point is, can we have ops engineering teams not drown in the complexity today, which they are? I mean, their lives are, really, really hard and complex. Can we make it simple, at least to, understand where the issues are, right? We focus on, the three crucial things we focus on. First, mean time to detect, mean time to innocence, right? And mean time to repair if you get there. If we can, be effective here, right, it will free them up to do, more valuable work. Right now, because there is so much heterogeneity and tribalism in, tools and domains, they are drowning just in these three aspects. Forget about MTTR, just mean time to detect and mean time to innocence, right? That alone will save them a lot of cycles, where then they can start to do things that are truly, outcome and value driven.
So what is your best advice to IT leaders? Because many of them are feeling a certain sense of paralysis of analysis. They're like, there's so much coming down the pike and there's so much change ahead. They're not quite sure what to do next.
Yeah, starting with, the basics on, like, what is the goal, right? I think everybody is clear their goal is automation, right? A cloud is just one method to get there, right? How do I automate as much as possible so that I can reduce the burden on my teams and save costs and improve overall customer satisfaction. And you can't automate what you don't know. You can't automate what is not visible. So it definitely starts with understanding the data. Right? You cannot apply a lot of those new technologies on ML till your data is I'm not even going to say clean, but your data is usable, right? So, starting with those basics, right? Do I have, good practices on data? Right? Am I able to get, basic intelligence and insights out of that, and then use that to, drive transformations and automation, right? So that process, you can't jump straight away to optimization and optimization till you do that, the basic work first, right?
All right, folks, you heard it here. It starts with data, it starts with science, and there's really not that much magic involved. Hey, Conan, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Mike.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
Hi again, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode of Techstrong TV. We had some amazing interviews with industry experts to give you the latest in the tech world. We'll be back again on Monday, so we hope to see you then. In the meantime, though, if you want more Techstrong TV content, be sure to check out some of our podcasts or download our mobile app. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. As always, stay strong. Techstrong.